Thursday, May 22nd, for a budget hearing. Councilors, a few things before we get started, just so that everybody's on the same page. We're going to first have a presentation from the mayor and Mr. Saracen regarding the budget. Councilors will then have an opportunity to make comment, not debate, individual comments about it. We will then start the hearings by bringing in the auditing department, the assessors, information technology down the thing tonight. When each department is here, I will read their overall budget, and then councilors will have an opportunity to ask questions and make comments regarding each individual line item. We're here from 6 o'clock till 9 o'clock tonight. We will recess at 9 o'clock or shortly thereafter if we're just finishing something up. Any of the councilors have any questions before we get started? If I could just ask councilors and those who are making presentations tonight to make sure that you speak up and talk clearly. We have been getting calls from people that the FA-TV, people are having trouble hearing some of the councilors and some of the people making presentations, and for those at home, it would be better if everybody would try to articulate a little louder. Okay, so we're going to get started by having the mayor and Mr. Saracen make their opening presentation regarding the budget. Madam Mayor?
Good evening, City Councilors. Welcome to another budget season. I first want to begin by thanking the finance team. Several of the members are here tonight, and also the many department heads who are very integral in putting together what we consider to be a solid budget, and one that is making improvements from year to year. Many of you have been with us for the past 6 years, so you've known how far we've come. We've had budgets in the past that have been very much focused on reacting to significant cuts in state aid and also significant decreases in local revenues due to the downturn in economy. And those are very, very tough sessions that we've had. Then the budgets were characterized by a catch-up period, and I believe that this budget is characterized by a stabilization for the most part, and also some very small, but they're in the right direction, investments in some areas to get us back on our feet. And particularly you'll notice, and again, they seem very small, but I think they're very significant, but you'll notice, for example, that we are looking to make the part-time custodial services at the senior center to a full-time one. So we'll have a full-time custodial services at both the senior center and the library. It's very small dollars, but we think that this is a big step towards having not only good maintenance of the physical assets that we own, but also will help us prevent really costly future issues. A lot of the especially the emergency items that we either have to find room within the budget or when things fall apart unexpectedly, and often unexpectedly, not because they're unexpected, but because we didn't have people watching and looking at those kinds of things. The other investments that you'll see is the recreation of the Community Development Department. This was something that we created several years ago, several budgets ago, and then due to funding, we eliminated the department head and clerical staff for that department. So we're sort of left with the middle managers that were dispersed to other departments. That department has been recreated actually with the existing staff to consolidate our efforts towards growth in the city. So just like we want to maintain and invest in our public buildings, we also want to maintain and invest in the city as a whole. And that means looking at economic development, that means looking at housing, that means aligning our planning and infrastructure so that we can focus on maintaining the city, especially in areas where we have lost ground over many, many centuries, and then actually start to make ground, primarily by focusing on changing the industries and the economy of the city, but also just making our city much more business friendly from the bottom up, so that we can welcome development at all levels. So again, sort of catching up, stabilizing, and then having small efforts to be proactive, in many cases with existing resources or just small added line items. Another thing to really note, primarily because of its absence in the budget, is the other post-employment benefit issue we had the opportunity to talk about this in the finance meeting. This is something that we've talked about wanting to include or start to fund. Funding it in the budget would be fairly significant. I mean, we're talking about several $1 million a year. So we're going to continue to find ways to fund that by hopefully getting new and dedicated funding sources that are not going to eat up our existing budget, but to fund those unfunded liabilities that you don't necessarily see in your budget. Another small note is we are starting to see some increases in revenue, and we're sort of hearing from people around the state that they don't really think that revenues are going to go up as quickly as they went down. So some of the things that we're kind of wary about is trying to figure out how to invest in some of the larger departments like public safety. So we've really looked at stabilizing those departments that have been significantly cut, and we provide in the appendix just some of the discussions that we've talked about for new funding sources that would be significant enough for us to begin to reinvest in those kinds of areas. In terms of the department specifics, because we're going to go department by department, line by line, I'm going to sort of save those general comments and answer your questions as we go in those individual departments, but I just sort of wanted to give you an overview of the financial situation in which this budget is a large part of that context. I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
The only comment I have is all of the councilors have been provided tonight with a supplemental revenue sheet. You may recall at the preliminary budget meeting a couple of weeks ago, the councilors requested actuals on the local receipts. So that is the purpose of this. So if everyone wants to look at it, if they have questions, we're all available to answer them. Okay? Yep, that's it.
Councilors, before we get to the councilors making comments, I would just like to make one more procedural thing. During each department's presentation, councilors are encouraged, if they so wish, to make recommendations for cuts. We will not take any votes. Council will make a recommendation. The auditor and the city clerk will tally that up every day and give us an ongoing, and at the end, when we have our final review, that's when motions will be made for those cuts and votes will be taken. We're going to start with the auditor's office, which is on page 12. Oh, before then, comments or questions from councilors? I have one. The only thing I'll say is that I do hope that when we finish this process, if there are cuts made, that the mayor would give serious consideration to putting monies that are cut from the city council into public safety, which is police, fire, and public works. Those are the departments that I think need the personnel and need some upgrades, and that's my wish that the mayor does with any cuts that we make. Starting with the auditor on page 12, fiscal year 15, the mayor has put in for personal services, $212,154, auditor expenses, $5,300, audit services, $62,000, for a total of $279,454. Questions or comments from the councilors? Oh, I've got one, Mr. Saracen, I guess. The deputy city auditor, we see going from $75,325 to $81,432. Is that a step raise, or is that something that is contractually negotiated, or is that just a raise that was given to that position?
It represents a 1.5 step adjustment. This position, as well as the deputy treasurer's position, have been adjusted by a step and a half. The step and a half is...
When you say adjusted, is that because this is the year that they should be going up?
No.
So this is a non-step year, and yet we're giving a...
Correct.
Okay.
And I could try to explain that.
Yep.
I'll let Calvin talk about the treasurer, but this is a veteran municipal auditor in serving 12 years of experience, 3 with the city, but the other 9 with other communities, which has helped us. She is a CPA, and she's also a certified governmental accountant. And what it does is it aligns this employee and the deputy treasurer with other employees in comparable positions with comparable experience. Actually, if you look at all 3, the assessors, the auditor, and the treasurer, you're going to find that the 3 deputy positions, if you will, the second assessor would all be at the same rate. So I could say more about the qualifications and what Jackie's done. It's been, as I said, when she was first hired, it was good for the department and it was good for the city, and it's been better than we hoped.
And if I could maybe step back, the context was, I include now the deputy positions in the finance team where they previously weren't. And because of that, I actually requested that Mr. Saracen and Calvin look at their deputy positions and make recommendations to me. And this was the recommendation that they came back with for that extra half a step.
Councilor Di Natale.
My own personal opinion for this specific line item, Deputy City Auditor, is that we're getting this position at a bargain. The employee is a CPA, and the second in command of managing the finances of a $145 million entity. So $81,000 a year, to me, in my own personal professional financial experience, is an extreme bargain. Thank you.
Councilor, I don't disagree that the individual may do a great job. I don't disagree that it may be a bargain when compared to the private sector. I do have concerns that an individual in 3 years has gone from $70,000 to $81,432 and is getting an increase when there is not a step where everybody else doesn't get one. Just a concern of mine.
Fair enough.
Any other questions or comments from the councilors regarding the auditor, personal services? Auditor expenses, $5,300. Questions or comments? Debt service, not debt service, audit services, $62,000. Questions or comments? Auditor total, $279,454. Any other questions for the auditor? Thank you, Mr. Saracen.
Still.
Yep.
Thank you, councilors. Thank you.
And I've lost them. Oh, we're going backwards. There we go. Yep. Assessors, page 11. Oh,
I think the next order was employee benefits and then miscellaneous.
oh, where are those in the book, Dick? Yeah, I know, I'm missing the pages.
49.
49 and, yeah.
They were separated out. Got it. Okay, employee benefits, page 49. Total of $24,953,000. Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you. On health insurance, FY09, $10.2 million was spent. FY10, $11.4 million. FY11, $12.5. FY12, $12.5. FY13, $12.4. So there's been stabilization there, around 12.5 for 3 years straight, and that's because of the bargaining moves the mayor made. And FY15 is 13.5, so about $1 million more than the last 3 years on average. And I probably understand the answer to that. It would probably be because the agreement that was reached a while back, that's kind of going away now, and now we're going to see an increase. Is that why we're increasing it by $1 million? My concern with this line item is, I know that to me this line item, in my experience looking at these figures, is hard to predict in terms of what it'll be. There has been a considerable amount of underspend in this account, even though we've got to be conservative. I'm not disputing the 13.5, but I look at this and I say, because of other things that are of critical need. For example, saying that maybe it would be 13.4. You know, how much of an impact is it to take this down 100,000, considering we've spent 12.5 the last 3 years, and we don't really know what the final total will be for 15? I believe that 13.4 is still $900,000 more than the last 3 years in total, and I don't believe it'll put the account in jeopardy, given the last 7 years of history. So I don't know if that's in agreement with the auditor and the mayor, but I'm going to make a recommendation regardless that that line item be cut by 100,000.
I can talk.
Mr. Saracen?
Yeah. Just want to say, before we get into that we were successful this year, and credit goes to the treasurer, Calvin, working with the mayor and the PEC to negotiate I think it's Public Employee Committee, to negotiate the new deal for the next 2 years. We're actually looking at close to 12.9. We budgeted, I think, 13 million this year for health insurance, and it does look like we're going to spend close to 12.9 this year. It is uncertain because June is a tricky month because you have your new rates, and you also have a balloon, what we call a balloon payment for the teachers for the summer, and that drives what is charged to this account for those people getting like 5 pays for the summer. But we are on track to spend between, I'll say, between 12.8 and 12.9. And you're going to see all of these are very, very tight. To try to balance the budget, I think we did really sharpen our pencils, and the expenditures aren't as conservative as they might have been in the past. The advisor that provides information to Calvin, and we also are provided, he budgeted, he gives us an estimate of around 12.7 for for 13,700,000. But we are hoping there's going to be shifting of people going from more expensive plans down to cheaper plans. And I just think I caution you that we probably would be back if it was 13.4. We're already concerned at 13.5. I don't know if Calvin, he could offer more if need be.
Councilor Green?
If we run over budget, if we've cut that line item by $100,000, and then you come to us and say, we need more money, where does that $100,000 that we cut, where does that come out of? Free cash or revolving account?
It would come either out of an appropriation of available funds, free
Okay.
cash, same thing. If there is money, and usually there is, or we would try to transfer from some other account within the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments regarding employee benefits? Councilor Beazall?
What falls under other benefits? What,
Other benefits is it's the contractual buybacks of accrued vacation and personal time. That's basically what it is for all city departments. And, people can accrue, let's say, 5 weeks of vacation every year. If they're not, and then if they're not out sick for a number of days, they accumulate personal days. And depending on the contract, they could sell back so many weeks rather than use the weeks. And that has been an incentive in many departments so as to avoid overtime, where people are working instead of being out. But that's what that is.
so as they're accumulating this time, is that kept in a ledger somewhere as a future liability?
Well,
In that,
there isn't a liability that's booked. It is kept not centralized, but it's by department. They do report to us. Ideally, we would have it on the Munis system.
Okay.
That is a future project that we're hoping to get to. But there is a liability that's booked on the audited financials for accumulated sick time and personal time, yes. But most of these, like vacation time, the end of a year, you can only carry over 1 week.
Okay.
and you can only carry over maybe 8 or 12 personal days. So the liability, it doesn't grow like sick leave. Sick leave accumulates, but if you retire, you may only get $30 a day or up to $10,000. Even though you may have 400 days, you may only get $10,000 or $12,000.
Okay, and my last question is, we were handed out the full-time equivalent of employee sheet on one of the first things, and it started with 2006, then it went to 2008, and then there was no recording. Is there any possible way to find out what the, from 2008 to present? I don't know if, it's actually this sheet here, it actually was handed to us one meeting, so is there any way of just so that you could probably give us what, and I know it's going to be kind of hard to figure, but what one associate, what their benefits would be worth. Because a lot of times when we hear about people's salaries, we don't really comprehend, well, this is the salary, but what is the benefits going to cost the city? Is there a percentage, or is there calculation that's used to figure that out? So if somebody were to come before us and say, here's a job for $50,000, we could say, well, in addition to that $50,000, we're going to have to tack on 4.5% onto that.
Right. There are percentages, I mean, it'd probably be more like 25 or 30% that you would tack on. You got to be careful with associating benefits with individuals because of HIPAA. Like we have to look at it as a group, and you do not want to associate, for example, someone with a family that comes in versus someone single that, health insurance, you can't.
I mean, so the benefit number is just the contribution number, but because we're self-funded, so let's say I'm an individual and he's a family. We have a contribution plan that we know is fixed. But as an individual, you don't know because of HIPAA laws that I might actually spend $1 million worth of that pool. So I'm taking multiple employees, and then you might assume that somebody with a family might be spending a lot, but they might not actually have any expenses throughout that year. So that's that HIPAA piece.
Yep.
So the benefits, we're talking about the actual benefits, we'll never really know that. That's why you have the actuaries that then pool it all together and then create those specific assessments that we pay.
And the retirement is different for public safety versus the regular municipal employees. They're Group 4. They can retire earlier at a higher percentage, or they max out earlier than a regular employee.
Yeah, and by all means, I would never ask any personal, that's why I use the word associates. But I think if at some point people are going to come before us and say, we'd like to add 3 people to our department, it would be nice to know what that percentage is going to be, so that next year, because, I mean, when you look at the employee benefits and how much we're paying out and how much that equates to what taxpayers are actually paying, it's 50% of what we're collecting. So every 50 cents a taxpayer is paying, 50 cents is going, and I'm not saying that people don't deserve that. I'm just saying we need to be aware of that when we're adding positions into the budget.
Right. And be aware that half of this, a good half of it is retirees, that, the retirement and the health insurance. It's a big part of it.
Is that, Councilman?
Yep.
Madam Mayor, did you have another comment, or just?
Just, I think, a few comments on health insurance that I think would be good to know. A number of these line items include both the city and the schools. So there is a net school spending effect. So health insurance, for example, is typically somewhere between 60 and 70% for the schools. So if this number were to be cut, we had calced this whole number as a percentage as part of that equation, so we would just have to readjust that later on. Another thing to note, because I believe that one of the things I've heard from all of you is that you want to know the long-term trajectory of things, because just because we can afford something this year doesn't necessarily mean that we can afford it next year. yet you often don't know that when you incur the expense, and you want to know what you're getting yourself into. The increases in health insurance have been upwards of 18%, especially if we've done nothing, and that far exceeds our revenue increases. So this is definitely an unsustainable line item. When we first looked at making plan design changes, which you'll see would actually so the 11.1 in fiscal year 8, I think would have gone to 12.8 in fiscal year 9 had we not done those initial changes. But you can't keep changing things because there's only so many ways you can change it too. So for example, that particular year, we had calculated that had we gotten everything that we wanted, we would have saved $2.5 million. But obviously, it's in negotiations that all the unions have to vote and accept. And they voted for 1.8 of the $2.5 million. So knowing that, we knew that there were still some changes that we could make to plan design, and then we also came up with some more. We made those changes again a couple of years at the expiration of that expired. We made some in these past 2 years. There's not a heck of a lot more savings. So if we sort of look at these trajectories a long way off, I'll give you an example. So if the 13.5 becomes 13.4, but then next year we project that to be over $14 million, and we don't have a way to fund that, then sometimes it's okay to sort of over budget that, because then you can carry that line item over and you have less of a gap between level funding and then trying to match that particular increase. So part of it is the finance team and the PC have done such a good job making these huge substantial changes, but I'm not sure how much more we can do if we project this another 5 or 6 years out. So this is definitely something that is still a big cautionary tale for us to figure out how to deal with the increases.
Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you, Mr. President. In response to Councilor Green's inquiry, and their good inquiries, first of all, I agree with the Council President about cuts being made going to public safety. I also would advocate it goes to a secondary reserve account in the budget and not put towards anything. Second, to Councilor Green's inquiry about my recommendation for a cut, in FY10, there was $325,000 remaining in the account. In FY11, there was $300,000 remaining in the account. In FY12, there was $640,000 remaining in the account. And in FY13, another $300,000 remaining in the account, for a average unspent of $400,000. Hence, my recommendation to cut it $100,000. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on employee benefits? Councilor Bean.
One question, maybe to Dick. For FICA, there are ways cities can help reduce the FICA expense to them by having I think there's a cafeteria plan, Section 125, and if they have a well-run program that can help reduce the FICA. Do we have such an account, or do we use a HSA, or how do we?
Right, we do that. We have a plan where we do not have to pay Social Security tax.
Right.
This is the extra, the employer's FICA, this is the 1.45%
Right.
add-on. That is for, I think it's for anybody hired after 88. So what happens is, it's based on compensation, so as people make more money, we pay more, and as the older population of employees retire and are replaced with the new people, now the new people are subject to that tax. The employees have to pay this also.
Right.
But-
But under, I think it's called like a flex spending program that they have, and maybe the treasurer may know more about this, but where employees can put post-tax money aside for health problems, things like that, or for daycare if they're young enough. Do we have such a program? And I know that I've heard cities that have been able to save quite a bit on FICA by doing that.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm trying, excuse me if
I
I
see
wasn't
what
clear,
you
but
mean.
basically
No, it's-
it's a program set up for employees to put money aside for
Right.
health issues. If you know you're going to be having site surgery, that you can put aside up to $7,000. There's maximums and things like that?
Right, the city does offer a flexible spending
Right.
plan.
Do people
That's
take advantage of it?
That's different from a health savings account.
Right.
Health savings account is offered if we were offering a high deductible health insurance, which we do not, and I don't believe we can because The GIC doesn't offer that. Right. So we do offer the flexible spending. That's part of a cafeteria plan, which allows healthcare insurance deductions and dental deductions and so on to be pre-tax rather than after-tax.
Right.
Having a deferred
That saves the city on the FICA.
having a deferred compensation plan does the same thing by lowering somebody's gross income, which then lowers the tax. Correct.
And the flex spending also for daycare, childcare, there's also an exemption.
There's also a childcare aspect to it.
And if they do it pre-tax, it saves the city the money on the FICA. So I was saying that, I've heard from cities that have done that, they've been able to make some savings, and if we can promote that, that's another way that hopefully we can reduce this by our own means.
Right.
Thank you.
Is that, Counsel?
Yes.
Any other questions and comments regarding employee benefits? We'll move forward to miscellaneous. Miscellaneous expenses, $749,900. Questions or comments regarding miscellaneous expenses? Seeing none? Thank you, Mr. Saracen.
Thank you, councilors.
Councilors, before we move on to assessors, I would just like to make a statement. I did not make a recommendation regarding the position that I spoke of, but I'm going to consider it and think about it, and at the end of the process, I may be making a recommendation there, so I just want everybody to be aware of that. We move forward to the assessors on page 11. Good evening, Mr. Wilson. Assessors personal services, $292,100. Assessors expenses, $71,000. Total assessor, $363,100. Questions or comments regarding the assessor's budget? Any comment you'd like to make, Mr. Wilson?
No, guess I put the time for nothing, huh? Thank you.
Can I just say that he and Chris are doing a great job?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next is page 13, information technology. Good evening, Mr. Bonilla.
Good evening.
Information technology, page 13, we will start with personal services, $163,537. Technology expenses, $6,000. Technology services, $306,750, for a total of $476,287. Questions or comments from the councilors? Councilor Di Natale.
I will state that I have done, as I have done so in the past, that I find the city website to be of substandard quality. I've documented several issues with the maintenance and user-friendly nature of the site, finding at one time more than 30 errors and broken links, and duplicate information being posted in different sections of the site. Every time the city council requests changes to the site, structural and cosmetic changes to make it more user-friendly, we're given excuses as to why it cannot be done. Why is it the policy of the city to rely on inexperienced and in some cases untrained departmental staff maintaining their own web pages when it is accepted practice in the private sector that IT is responsible for maintenance of a company's website and receives information from all corners of that company to disseminate to the public? What policies the website, the policies of the website and whether it is accurate and up to date, what are the policies of that website? One example is when the new treasurer was hired months ago, it took more than a month to list the new person's name and email address, leaving the former treasurer's contact information intact. I'm going to state for the record, councilors, that I spoke with the controller of Leominster this afternoon. Leominster's IT budget is $163,000. 29% what ours is. I asked him, do you have any full-time employees? No. What do you guys do? They contract out a company called Guardian Technology. Again, a 42,000-person city spends 1/3 what we spend. And he assured me that everything and anything the city needs for its IT purposes has been met satisfactorily. I know there are some who might hate or dislike me comparing us to Leominster all the time. But Leominster does a lot of things right that we don't. And maybe some people may not think it's apples to apples, but I look at a similar-sized city, and I look at our critical needs in certain areas of the city, and it infuriates me that we are spending more than $300,000 on average per year more than our counterparts. And from a cost-saving perspective, from a cost-saving measure, it makes perfect sense, and it's not just with Leominster. So when I look at those financial facts, it's hard for me not to make a recommendation that we go in that avenue. Because when I look at the taxpayers in the face, and I tell them, we don't have money to repair your road, we don't have money to hire more cops or firefighters, but then I look at the city of Leominster telling me that they're getting their IT services for 30% of the cost, it bothers me. And it should bother all of you. And I'm sure tonight we'll hear several reasons and excuses why we can't do this, and I'm not going to buy it. In dollars, like I said, this is more than $300,000 a year. That is 6 police officers, and the plan is to spend $475. So when I look at not just Leominster, but other communities, whether they'd use public employees or private sector employees, the fact is there are other communities of a similar size like ours that are spending far less. And we would be unwise to ignore that fact. So maybe I'm skipping ahead here with the line items, Mr. President, but I am going to put a recommendation on the floor that I would like to have $476,287 removed from the budget, from the IT budget. Thank you.
Councilor Bean.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to the IT director. When it comes to the expenses, I see the big line, telephone, $130,000, contractor services, $99,000. Could you just go into a little bit more detail of what those are? I mean, that's my concern is that we have 3 employees, right? But we also have all these contracted services to supplement the 3 employees. And could you just explain why and what those costs are?
Yeah, contracted services are all the annual support costs for all the databases or software applications that need that annual support for updates, upgrades, that type of thing.
Each year it's $100,000?
Yes, sir.
And the telephone, why is that so high?
Telephone is...
Everybody has that internet connection and the reducing cost.
Yeah, telephone is all of the copper lines to all of our older structures, all of the DID lines for our known phone system, all the cell phones.
Support city computers, is that, you don't support it internally?
Computer support is basically whatever equipment needs to be replaced, basically switches, servers, that type of thing.
Okay. So going back to contracted services, $99,750. Give me a little bit of breakdown of what do we, is it one service we're paying that amount of money to, or is it a number of services?
No, it's...
Licenses, or is it...
I apologize, I did not bring a list of all of them, but it's the database for the fire department, the police database for the fire department, the databases, all the multiple databases, SQL databases in the city, water, wastewater, several.
So those aren't in the other budgets, they're just in your budget?
They're in my budget. I handle all of the budget for
The telephone costs and all the other budgets, it's all in your budget?
copiers, peripherals, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Councilor Green.
Up at help desk technician,
Yes.
FY14, $13,000, FY15, $38,000. Can you just explain what that means, or what we're doing there with that?
Yes, I requested that bring him from a part-time to a full-time position this year. He's doing a great job for us with, customer support and help desk, and we need that help. It's a very large responsibility, this department, and we need a third person.
And again, my question, similar to Counselor Bean's, the $99,000 for contracted services and support, how many system upgrades is that?
It's not necessarily a system upgrade, it's the annual support cost for owning a database and having to, there's updates to databases, there are updates to software. You have to buy that maintenance contract or you do not get those, and then you fall behind and it's costing more. Those are fixed costs for software. There's nothing in there extra besides the cost to do business, the database cost, or the software cost for upgrades.
Upgrades
Yeah,
and
you have to
maintenance
buy-
to
yeah,
that?
you have to buy an annual support to a software company to get the updates. If you
Okay.
don't do that next year, they'll have an update, you won't get it, and then you fall behind.
Okay. Thank you.
Counselor Di Natale.
I'm sorry, I forgot one more thing, because I'm looking at this and I understand that I'm probably going to get hit with, well, the telephone budget's in here. Even if you take the telephone budget into consideration, we would still save $180,000. Leominster's budget for IT has web page maintenance, high-speed internet connection, email, semi-annual server pack maintenance, annual web page hosting and services, tech infrastructure improvements, and contracted service for $164,000. Now add 115 of telephone, you're at 280 versus our 475. And if you take the telephone costs out of the 475, we're at 280 versus 375. So there is a savings here, and maybe this will force that analysis, because I will not be convinced of the argument that this will not save us money. Thank you.
Counselor Caddy.
It's not making sense to me about the figures from Leominster. If you look under Information Technology Services, your telephones, your contract, support, office equipment, copiers, computers, repairs, internet, those items alone add up to $310,000. If Leominster's budgeting $163 for their IT, somewhere, this $310,000 has to be pumped into some other people's budgets. It has to be. So something isn't making sense with me. I'm not going to call Leominster and start asking them where each placement is, but it's not making sense.
Counselor Kuchmarek.
Sure, I see here a line item for telephones. I understand we've had some difficulty with telephones in the past. Can you walk me through, I see a request for a slight increase for this next year. How far is this year's budget going to go towards mitigating these past or current telephone issues? Additionally, I don't see anything broken out here for the city's website, and Councilor Di Natale is absolutely correct. Our website is an absolute embarrassment, and I realize part of that is, the platform, it's outdated technology. I fully realize that. I realize that your answer for, individual pages being updated is pushing it back to the individual departments, but where in the pipeline do we expect to be able to bring, new technology in, to have a robust, cutting-edge platform for a website? When can we start to be equivalent to our peers in this respect? And
I would like to,
what is the cost for that down the road that you project?
I'd like to come back before council as soon as we see the free cash this year and try to replace this webpage this next fiscal year. Estimated between $40,000 and $60,000 for a completely robust webpage rebuild. We got away on the cheap last time with this one, and now it's starting to show its age. So I would suggest that I come back before you guys with a recommendation for a webpage rebuild this next fiscal year.
And for telephones, can you speak a little bit to, repairs or upgrades? And can you also explain to me, this is new to me, but seeing hundreds of thousands of dollars for telephones seems exorbitant to me. So can you just kind of explain to me, I guess in layman's terms, why the costs are so high and what goes into that?
It's copper cost for the older infrastructure. It's the new phone systems, the maintenance. It's the DID cost, the annual cost, the PRI cost, which is the connection to the buildings. It's also all my cell phones. It's all of the police cruiser connections to data. Anything that's using cellular data is in that list. So that's why it's large. We have a number of cell phones, we have tablets, we have police cruisers.
When you say copper costs, is that physically repairing copper wires?
No, some of the older structures still have copper lines running to them. The police and fire department are two departments. The multiple departments of theirs, the buildings, they all have copper running to them. I'm sorry?
Then do you expect that we need to replace those copper lines? And if so,
Right now, I have a phone system in the purchasing process to be replaced at the police department before the end of this fiscal year. So that'll divert the cost to a PRI and digital lines and a voice over IP system, which is a digital system. Those copper lines can go away minus, a half a dozen for emergency situations. 911, E911 will still be needed out there. But yeah, I'm working on that now. That phone system, actually, we should be seeing something at the police department in the next couple of weeks.
thank you.
Madam Mayor?
One thing that would be very helpful, which is not provided in this budget, is when all of these individual telephone and contracted services were encapsulated in everyone's budget. When we first consolidated under IT, the numbers were maybe 30 or 40% higher. And then I said, all right, here's a number, it's 300,000, make it 2. Those were the first conversations. So the initial consolidation did help, just in terms of what the city was spending, because a lot of those costs were being hidden in different departments. So that's certainly information that we can provide to you at another point in time. Another, I think I just want to speak about in terms of IT, because we haven't really talked about it here, but I utilize IT to do a lot of more than just the typical IT services. So I contract them with a lot, for example, on the city's 123 expanded Wi-Fi project. I have them do research in terms of looking at the streetlights and the technology related to that. So there are a lot of ancillary services. I get their input when it comes to JS mapping and economic development issues. So I do believe that they do provide a lot of in-house value besides just the intrinsic planning. Another thing that we just haven't talked about is security issues. Every time we upgrade major phone systems, for example, I think could be like $44,000 or $45,000, even just for one department for a baseline. One of the things that we need to look at is we need to look at cybersecurity and phone security. There's a lot of sensitive data that the city has, and there's a lot of places that we are potentially vulnerable. We've started talking about that. And I hate to say this, but a lot of the big line items that you might see coming out of IT requests are going to be things like that for security purposes. And it's hard to put a value on that. You don't want it to happen in the first place, but if it does, it could be fairly devastating. And what we want to do is we want to be proactive and prevent those kinds of things. So we're going to start to see a lot more IT upgrades as part of our capital and security planning.
Councilor Bezal.
So when I'm looking at the bottom part here, and it says telephone, and I'm looking at building and health, they have no expense in those departments. So you're basically, when I'm looking at this encompasses the whole city, correct?
Minus schools.
Minus schools. So if we were to cut this line out today, pretty much no one would have a phone?
Yeah, the bills would stop being paid and, right, yes, sir.
So the contracted services and support, so similar to our home computers, when we have our own software that we get, whether it's McAfee or anything else.
Your antivirus, exactly.
Right. We pay every year to get this upgraded. Who does all the bidding on that? Like, who looks around and says, give us the best price for taking care of this? Who's
State contracts mostly, if we're out looking for a new product,
Right.
but it's sole source once we're into a situation like our, certain, like Munis, for instance, is a sole source there's no otherybody else in the world that does it. So some are sole source, and some we go out to the state contract for.
Okay. And computer supplies and repairs, is that you actually going and doing repairs, or is that outside companies, or?
Yeah, that's typically the line item for replacement, PC replacement.
Okay.
We have 190 workstations that we're responsible for and 23 servers. So those are the annual cost to replace. Typically, you want to replace 1/3 every year. We're probably doing 1/4 every year at this budget.
Okay. And the support, like, for the city computers, in 13, it was 102,000, and this year, it's 30,000. What happened in 13 that?
That was something that came before you guys to ask for money.
Okay.
I would imagine that was either the phone system in the municipal
Okay.
offices or some other cost, office upgrade,
All right. Okay, thank you very
I
much.
imagine is what that was.
Counselor Caddy.
I was trying to stop you earlier. You're an IT guy talking to some people who aren't, and you're using abbreviations and things.
I'm sorry.
And I didn't even understand when you were talking about copper lines. What's the expense of a copper line over something that's not a copper line?
Just a quick history, if the phone system was put into a police station 15 years ago, if there's 50 phones, there's 50 lines or more. Those are 50 times whatever the cost is, $25 a month. That's the cost of copper. Now what happens is we bring a T1 in, we buy DID numbers and put it on a PRI,
What's
which
DID?
they're dedicated lines, basically. But they're on the internet. They're not necessarily copper phone lines.
Okay.
So now it's, many people can use 2 lines or 3 lines. There's a formula.
So the cost goes down.
Right, cost goes down.
Which is-
Once you pay off the cost of the phone system, then there's...
Which is going to lead to my question. If we were to purchase IT equipment, would our overall budget go down after we purchase those things? Like the copper lines you're talking about? If you go from 50 lines down to 2 lines, my guess is you're paying a lot less.
Yes.
So are we not putting money into IT? And is this going to continue to go up if we don't?
I think with the phone system that we're buying, I think you'll see, once we pay off the phone system at PD, we'll see a savings. So I think that, I asked for level funding this year. I didn't ask to go up or go down this year. I asked for an increase in my personnel to a full-time position, but I thought that I had enough money this year to continue on to next year, minus, obviously, the webpage, which I know there's a lot of frustration about.
I'm bringing back a memory that at some point, we had phone lines that we had no, phone numbers, we had no idea what they went to, and we were
Many.
paying for them.
Many of them.
Is that still in existence?
That's cleared up everywhere that we're maintaining. I don't know about the school system, the school side, but it was pretty amazing how many copper lines we had, over 200,
So
before we
that's,
put the phone system in City Hall.
so that's in our sights this year, is the phone system, to get rid of the copper lines?
Yeah, the police department would be next, and then I would hope that the 2 phone systems at police and City Hall can handle the traffic of fire, and then we could have redundancy between the 3 departments.
If we move forward with a new website technology, who's going to maintain that, or is that going to be contracted out? We will.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be contracted out in the sense that they'll get it up and running, get it exactly the way the city wants it, but then IT would maintain that in the future, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Counselor Tran.
Thank you, Mr. President. Trevor, the telephone line, does that consist of mobile services?
Yes, all of them.
I believe last year you supplied the city council a list of all the mobile telephone numbers that are being serviced by the city. Have we identified, or are we still paying for mobile lines that people are using that shouldn't be using?
No, there's, well, I mean, that's a tough question. I think that we have, our phone system, our mobile lines are completely on top of it. We know who's using them, we know where they are, we know how much is being used by each cell phone. I mean, there's a question, there's a lot of cell phones out there, and there's a lot of pressure on IT to replace phones with smartphones. Everybody wants a smartphone now, and there's a battle there. So, I mean, I think you're asking me, is there any unknown usage? No, sir.
Okay. And I just want to make sure that any mobile lines that the city is being expensed should be used in a professional manner. Another question is the internet access. Last year was, we expensed $17,000. We're expecting the actual to be a little over $7,000. This year, we're expensing another $17,000. Why is that?
Internet access is each department has internet access now, each building separately. I now maintain 16 locations, which we've added several over the last year. Those costs are just growing as the network grows.
So are those costs being calculated into the fiscal 14? Or are they not yet realized until fiscal 15?
Right, I still have a lot of cost. I'm projected to have probably about $10,000 in my budget at the end of this fiscal year, after all my costs.
And support for city computers?
Yes. That's the replacement. That's the replacement line for city computers. I currently have 21 machines being delivered at some point in the next couple of weeks as my last order of PCs.
So the number we're looking at, $30,000 for fiscal 15 is going to cover that?
I asked for level funding. I think that the city felt that they needed to cut. That's about 10% cut in my operating costs, but, I mean, I'll do what we'll make it work.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilor Green.
Trevor, can you just clarify, under computer supplies and repairs, 190 workstations and 23, what was the 23?
Right now, we maintain 23 servers and 190 workstations. We have 16 locations that we maintain a network. 13 police cruisers, and, I mean, endless number of peripherals, printers, copiers, cell phones.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Councilor Di Natale.
We have to start asking ourselves if we're going to be serious and we tell the taxpayers that we want improved efficiency and lower costs. Let's play devil's advocate for a second and assume that Leominster's got the $6,000 expense line item and the $306,000 services line item spread out throughout the entire other budget outside of IT in their account. Their budget is $164,000 for all IT needs, and the personal services line item is $164,000. What's the one caveat between Leominster and us? They don't pay any benefits. Okay? Again, I am not budging from this position. I've had it with finding out about other communities that are doing things just as good as we are, if not better, at a far lower cost. This would drive the discussion for an analysis to prove me wrong that we would not save money, because I don't think that would show we won't save money. I'm not convinced of that in the least. And if you break it all down to that simplest term, that's the one caveat that we're doing that they're not, and other cities aren't. I hate to beat a dead horse, but we sit here all the time and listen about pension and health care being the biggest budget busters, and yet we continue to do things that other cities no longer do. So are we serious about it, or are we not serious about it? And I'm not hanging my hat on this one department. This goes for anywhere else where we can do a similar thing, because as a representative of the taxpayers, when I see other communities like us doing things differently at a lower cost, it's only natural that I ask those questions. And it's only natural that I'm going to get tremendous pushback, because that's a change not many people want to talk about, because change is tough. And maybe it's easy for me to talk about the change because I'm sitting in this chair, but how can I look at people in the eye and say, yeah, we've looked through this budget and the efficiencies are 100% top-notch, we can't find any savings anywhere. I can't look at them with a straight face doing that. So my cuts are going to stand. At the very least, if it makes people put at ease, we don't have to cut telephone out, but I want to force that analysis now and put it to bed. because when I get information like this and I don't act on it, I feel I'm doing a disservice to those I represent. Thank you.
Councilor Kushner.
Troy, can you give me a sense, you said we have a lot of work for that part-time help desk technician, enough to justify moving to a full-time position. Can you give me a sense of what their day-to-day is and how it's broken out?
He does help desk for the most part throughout the day. We do a lot of running to different departments. Police and fire are 24/7. Right now, we're handling that between myself and Phil, not him because he's part-time.
Sure.
I'd like to be able to bring him on and take some of that relief, relieve a little bit of that.
Just software and hardware issues?
Software, hardware. He's also starting to work on the databases, maintain that stuff, just as as an additional person.
At any point, have we explored outsourcing to outside help desk assistance instead of moving to physical staff?
We have, yeah. We've looked into it, and it's not cost efficient. It's cheaper at entry level to bring somebody on than it would be to hire a company to come in and do that. Plus, we have 24/7 response. He's there to do it. When people have a problem with the computer, they want it fixed. The numbers from Leominster are vastly different. So I investigated 7 or 8 communities, and I'll be glad to give it to the council, a couple of years ago on cost per IT use, and Fitchburg's was cheaper by far than any other community in the Commonwealth. Well, sorry, the 6 or 7 I looked at with a 40,000 population. So the comptroller doesn't handle the police and fire networks.
With regards to the website, so you said you're looking to kind of overhaul the website, bring in something, bring in someone new that would build it out for us. Is that inclusive of, adding all fresh content, regenerating, revitalizing all of our content, working with each individual department?
Yes.
Kind of walk, I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but could you walk me through what an implementation of a new website would look like? And then how do we keep up with it to keep it from, because our current platform is terrible. So that explains, half of the eyesore, but the other half is keeping refreshed content. How can we change that behavior and that culture to make sure that the content is always fresh and new?
It's going to be difficult for one department to handle all the content for all of the departments, because there's no one person that knows everything that's happening in the city. I think the formula of having departments handle their content with a content management system is the correct way to do it still.
So we have a content management system now, albeit outdated.
A very old one, yes.
So how do we change that culture? So if what you're saying right now is that the other departments aren't doing their job to update it, how do we change that culture so that the other departments update? How are we encouraging, incentivizing, or providing a stick, so to speak, for those who don't update their pages and make the most out of their website?
Yeah, I think there's an authority that's needed to make people, as part of their job, update their webpage.
I guess it just, as much as I want the new website, it scares me that I want to hear that we have a plan in place to make sure that we'll be making the most out of this.
Yeah, I think that there's a user, not a user problem. The content management system we currently have is not intuitive. It's an old system. We bought it locally by a company that was working in Fitchburg. It worked great while they were around. When they closed up shop, we really lost a handle on it. I believe a new content management system would be much easier for users in the future.
So I recently went through a new website implementation a couple of years ago, and I was part of the leadership team at Fitchburg State that helped implement this. And wonderful new content system, and it's great. It did help initially encourage people to go in and refresh content. Much easier than it used to be, but it's still, at the end of the day, it is still a culture change, and you have to have a system in place to make sure that people are doing this, just because it doesn't become part of their day. If it isn't part of their routine, they're not going to do it. Right. So we need to find a way to make sure that we're kind of systematically reviewing, and there is, I'll get an email at the end of every month, like, this is outdated, this link doesn't work. So I essentially get a shame on you. You haven't been doing your job. You better go and update, refresh, make sure the broken links are now linked appropriately.
Right.
Will we have a system in
Yeah,
place?
that would be part of a new content management system that we do not have currently.
So, unrelated to the website, and aside from cybersecurity, which Mayor Wong spoke about as being kind of the next big thing that we'll have to concern ourselves with, what is the future, vision of your department? Where does technology need to go over the next 5 to 10 years for this city? And kind of a secondary relating question of, where do you see this future vision and technology playing in cost reduction? Do we have a plan in place?
Yeah, virtual servers is something that we started doing 2 years ago. That will continue to save us money. At some point, cloud database, cloud technology is going to be, we've started that process in the last couple of years. We're starting to put our databases out on the cloud as opposed to maintaining hardware to man them. Disk space, as anybody in technology knows, you run out of disk space constantly. You're constantly fighting that. That'll be gone. That's the future. VoIP phone systems like we're currently putting in, that's the future of the departments.
Do you have a 5 or 10 year plan for your department and where you'd like to see?
No, not a 5 or 10 year plan, no. We typically plan out a year or two, like the web page this year.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, you want to comment?
Sure. Just, so on the website in particular, I'm not sure if anybody remembers the one before the one that we have, but in that first year that I was in office, I thought that was pretty terrible and very static. So I asked Trevor to create a new website that cost us, I tried to get him to do it for nothing, but I think it was a few $1,000s for at least the platform. So he did let me know then that it was going to be a significant cost, like $40,000 to $60,000 for a website. And I don't know if you remember in 2008 when we laid off a lot of people, I didn't think it was justified at that time. But I do believe that it is something we all feel is holding us back from a customer service standpoint and an economic development standpoint. I don't necessarily feel comfortable just saying to Trevor now, let's just find the money and then you can be in charge of developing the website. I think a website is something that, as the IT people, they will develop based on what our mutual interests are. So I heard you say that you were part of a leadership team to develop that website. So the website didn't just come from an IT person out of thin air. I just want to take that suggestion and so the first request that you'll see from me is not going to be, I want a bunch of money, but will some of you be part of a team so that we can develop whatever this future website's going to be?
Councilor Green.
Again, just being brand new at this, and Trevor, I don't personally know you, so please don't take offense when I say this, but again, I'm having a hard time believing that 3 potentially full-time employees would be able to handle this and where we want to go in the future with it. And I would be so much more comfortable with a big company, Guardian Technology or whoever it may be, that has hundreds of employees that can take care of these issues, again, at a moment's notice. I would just like to entertain that idea that, man, I don't want to keep doing it because it's the cheapest alternative. I think that we deserve more. I mean, for a couple of years now, that website hasn't looked good. So, again, don't take it personally, but I do agree that we at least need to do a comparison between contracted services for this department and keeping it in-house. Thank you.
Councilor Tran.
Thank you, Mr. President. I like what Councilor Di Natale said about when something doesn't work, let's look at other ways of getting it done. That comment shouldn't apply just to the IT department, but it should apply to all the other departments when return of investment is not realized. One of the things that I'm a proponent of and keep on advocating to all the officials in this room is to attend the Massachusetts Municipal Association meeting, conferences, where there are tables, rows of tables of vendors that display their services And those services are really beneficial to municipals like ours. I know the times that I've went, I've seen other elected officials. I've seen many from Leominster. I've seen Mayor Mazzarella there many times. And that's probably where they see all the services there, and then they bring the services back to the city and incorporate that and use those services to save the money. A lot of these services can save us, if not half, a third of the budget that we pay for many of the things that we see in the budgets. So if we're not getting the return of investment, then maybe we should look at going outside to bringing in other services that can do what we need them to do. Thank you.
Mayor Wong.
There was a question about whether there was a 5 to 10 year plan. A 5 to 10 year plan regarding the capital equipment and IT should not be done in isolation from the larger needs of the city. So I do believe that that's probably one of the ways that we should start. The evolution of this office is probably important for you to know in terms of how it got here. So Trevor was the GIS person, so he was doing a lot of planning GIS work. Phil was a full-time person working exclusively for the police department and to some degree to the fire department. The 2008 financial report cited that the lack of an IT department was a major financial detriment to the city. There was nobody that was managing IT. So somebody who might, for example, implement a wireless camera in the police department might accidentally incur a $3,000 a month connection charge because they've connected it the wrong way, just like it's like your cell phone was using constantly before you had unlimited. So there's a lot of things like that created these financial liabilities. In order for us to create a finance department at a time that we were laying off, we utilized 2 existing staff who we asked to be the IT department in addition to the duties that they were doing before. So we didn't add any staff to the net budget when we created that IT department. We also didn't take away their duties that they were doing prior. So over that time, that was pretty overwhelming, and we started to utilize very cheaply these health technicians for $5,000 here and $10,000 there to try and get all of the work done. They've done a tremendous job, but we do believe, looking at the ability to maintain what we need, it's almost around the clock for police and fire, what we need to maintain in terms of GIS services, what we also need to maintain in terms of management, somebody who's advocating for us, for the whole system, instead of departments individually calling a company, that we needed somebody that was there for us at a moment's notice, that this was the cheapest way to go to maintain those services. So if you look at the services that we have, we've been able to save money in expenses, we didn't add staff, and now we've been slowly adding the health technician. If we wanted to completely eliminate that and go to some other type of thing that other folks are doing, I have to caution that it isn't apples to apples, and that larger analysis does need to be done to make sure that we preserve the services that we are getting and to really weigh those kinds of pros and cons. This is not something that I think is just very easy to say, let's just replace people or staff with consultants and then we're going to get the same kind of service, especially if we haven't figured out what that overall plan is. I've essentially been wearing a CEO, CFO hat for the last couple of terms. It seems like the COO hat has really risen to the surface in terms of realizing that the city in all its 250 years never really had standard operating procedures for just about anything. So we've been really focusing on those kinds of things as well as putting that capital plan in place. It sounds like looking at the website and some marketing stuff and also developing a long-term capital plan are going to be on those operations list of things to do. So we're going to not only duly note your concerns regarding the budget, but we're also going to duly note your concerns about what you want to see actually happen.
Councilor Bean.
Thank you, Mr. President. Kind of another deja vu moment. I remember 30 years ago in the council chambers talking about, are we going to privatize or contract out the rubber services, and the same discussions, well, are we going to lose control of that? But obviously it was the best move, one of the good moves we made. So I think, comparing it at some point, or sitting down, whether you're the chief executive officer or department heads, looking at, can we do better than, or can contract services do better? Or, which way is better or more effective to do it? And I'm just asking you, Mayor, have you looked at that? Have you begun a process? And, just so you can answer the question, but I think there are times where it may make sense to go out and get a private service to do it, to save money. It's kind of hard to compare, unless you're comparing apples and apples, like with the IT, we said. When you look at the salaries here, you got to add the 25% to that number that's there. You got to add 25% on for employee benefits and others. So you really got to look at apples to apples. But just recently in the MMA bulletin, there was, I think the city of Methuen went out and contracted out their IT and saved money. Now, it may work in some places, may not work in others, but I just want to ask, Mayor, have you been doing that due diligence? Have you been looking at it? Give you an opportunity to speak on the issue.
Yeah, I think, you pose a larger question, and in the city, typically IT and some other functions would fall underneath a chief operating officer. Right now, you don't have anything. You have me, that's it. So in looking at all these systems, I haven't been focusing on IT as much as I would like, except to try and get their budget as down as possible, which we succeeded, try to keep it down, but also try to make improvements every year. So every year, we've made significant improvements in software, then we made significant improvements in the capital hardware, and then we made significant improvements in some of the customer service pieces, which we're trying to do right now, and hopefully the website. So, every year we have these sort of goals that I have them implement. In terms of replacing them wholesale, that's a fairly big task. And I'll tell you, in the next couple of months, my eyes are focused on a couple of other departments in terms of developing standard operating procedures, because the cost-benefit ratio of spending my time there is significantly higher. You mentioned Shea Street project yesterday, for example, is getting the DPW and getting the procurement stuff in line is fairly key for me. So that's part of, I think, a larger discussion, is we can look at these things individually, but we also have to say to ourselves, if we want to do these things, what is the actual time that it takes? So with looking at IT, we have to look at the actual time it takes to do the things that we want. If we get to a place where we have all the stuff that we need, we have the great website, everything, all of this stuff is done, we have these procedures in place, perhaps then a pretty standard maintenance service of hundreds of people who have all of this expertise, with maybe a much smaller role in somebody to manage oversight and change. But I would say the past 6 years in terms of IT has been create a department of nothing, use existing staff, cut the budget, do something significant every single year. That's essentially what we've been focusing on. Those are the goals I've given to them. They've met those. I've been satisfied. But I agree, we could do better.
Okay, I guess my question is, are you open to looking at, and they call it managed competition now. Actually, you have the city department up against, you actually can go out to bid and have the city department bid on it with other departments, with the private sector. So I'm not saying the private sector is always the savior or the end-all, but I think, as Councilor Green said, some of these contracted services can provide a much broader array of services and a lot more expertise that are just used at this one period of time, and they can bring in a lot more expertise. I'm not saying it could work. I'm just saying we should look at it. Other cities are doing it. They're saving money, not only money now, but money in the long run for post-employment figures and that. So I just think it's worth looking at and exploring, and whether we go do a couple RFPs out there to have people respond. You don't have to accept it. At least then you know what the competition is all about. And I think it's always good to go out there every 2 or 3 years to see if we're getting the best deal for our buck.
I think because we were using existing staff, there wasn't necessarily a large change in terms of that. If we were creating something wholesale from nothing, you won't have the sunk cost to really take a look at. In terms of moving forward, I can certainly put this on the agenda of the finance team to take a look at it from a financial aspect, but I think the larger questions of not just what it costs, but what do you get, really has to be answered by a whole bunch of us. I can certainly give my one-person opinion, and I have, and they've met those particular goals, but it seems like it's a much broader task than you're saying, of just simply doing a survey, getting costs, and then comparing those things. It's pretty extensive, what we do. That's certainly something that I can put, again, on the agenda of things to do, but I can't guarantee you that I'm personally going to get to that anytime soon.
And I'm not limiting it to just the IT. I'm thinking, as you look at any department services that we could get, at a reduced rate and be as effective, if not more effective.
And we have been doing that kind of tactic, starting with significantly larger departments, and then sort of working our way down to.
I mean, that's why we hire an
the smaller-
engineering firm. You know, we do that now. We have engineers, but we hire an engineering firm because they have a broader base of people to work with in that.
Absolutely.
So I think we should look at, expand that to other services and other areas. So.
Counselor Bezal.
I think when we're looking at the contracted services, one of the huge benefits is, let's say Trevor has 6 top projects that he wants to get done. He calls a contracted service, tells them exactly what he wants. They say, Trevor, it's going to take 5 people 6 months to do this. After everything is said and done, he pays them and they move on. He has basically everything that he wants done. And the reality is, we're not concerned as to carrying this person year after year. So if it's a temporary thing, so I'm hoping that department heads, when they look at the tasks that they have to do, is saying, I'd love to get these 6 tasks done, instead of saying, let's just hire one person, and these 6 things are going to take him 10 years to complete. Sometimes it's better off to contract out and say, can you just give me all of this manpower right now? Let's get these tasks done. Let's get my department where it needs to be, and once my department is where it needs to be, then you know something? We may use you in the future. Great job, thank you. Cut them a check, and now you're satisfied, and the city's happy because they have everything that they want. So there is a benefit to it. So I don't think we need to solve this tonight. We're definitely not going to be able to. But I think it is something that somebody needs to look at in the future. Thank you.
I'm certainly not going to give you the time to solve it tonight, Counselor.
Well, I'll research it if you want.
Counselor Di Natale.
I would request strongly that the analysis be conducted by an independent third party and not by the city. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to state, councilors, that with the concerns that we have about OPEB and benefit packages and all of that, I do have concern with any additional positions or personnel that are added into the budget, not just this department, but I will make a recommendation that if Councilor Di Natale's recommendation to outsource this does not have a majority of the votes, and we're going to stay with an internal IT department, I will make the recommendation to cut the help desk technician back to the $12,398 that it spent last year. I'm sure, like everybody else, they could use more people, but more people means more benefits, more costs to the city, and I'm reluctant to put any of those on in non-public safety capacity in this budget. Thank you. Any other questions for information technology? Councilor Green.
Of course, right. It would be helpful if we could get a list of all the services that IT take care of, just so that we can compare apples to apples, so that there's no miscommunication about what we're asking contracted services to provide for us that
Absolutely.
you wouldn't already do, or forward thinking on services that we could be utilizing in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Councilor Tran.
Mr. President, in parallel with your recommendation to cut that position back to fiscal 14, you should also look at reducing the clothing allowance back to the fiscal 14 number as well.
Is that a recommendation?
Yes.
Any other questions or comments regarding information technology? Thank you, Mr. Padilla. Councilors, we will be moving on to purchasing, but I'm going to ask for a 90-second to 2-minute recess. They will turn the televisions off. I need to excuse myself for just 1 minute, and I will be right back. We are recessed. We will now go to purchasing, page 15. Purchasing personal services. And here, councilors, is where there was a correction that Mr. Saracen gave you the handout. And the purchasing personal services is $212,386. Purchasing expenses, $7,000. Total of $219,368. Questions regarding purchasing? Councilor Green.
The question about the deputy procurement officer, is that a new position that's being added?
Yes, it is.
Well, it was created by ordinance this fiscal year and will be hired this fiscal year. We had hoped to get this person on board last year, but went through multiple rounds to actually find somebody to meet the qualifications.
Okay, because that, can you explain what that is, what procurement officers do, and maybe some of their tasks and duties?
So this used to be the purchasing agent, and then we had an assistant purchasing agent, and then we had the clerical position. The assistant purchasing agent was not like, was very dissimilar to a deputy in that they were essentially a clerk plus with a couple of other higher level skills, and therefore in the FAMAS group, and not the clerical group, where the duties are very limited to what you can do. So you can't necessarily help out on some of the issues. There was a couple things that were identified. One was, in many departments, including the auditor's department, if a person was on vacation, or if they were on sick leave, or whatever things that meant that they were out of the office, then the whole city might grind to a halt. So if we don't have an auditor, or if we don't have somebody in payroll, or if we don't have somebody in purchasing, there's many positions in which there's only one person. We wanted to create a higher level position, like a deputy auditor, deputy purchasing agent, we discussed, but we said, let's call it a procurement officer instead. So the ordinance sort of recreates all these positions, names the chief procurement officer, which is essentially the old purchasing agent, creates this deputy procurement, which is a much higher level, because the assistant purchasing agent position could never replace a purchasing agent. So somebody's out and then somebody can sign or walk in their stead. There wasn't that gap, there was a skills gap there where that person could not step up. There's only one procurement officer designated by a municipality. So it can't be designated to me, it can't be designated to John Barrett, it can't be designated to others at that particular level. So it would be a problem if, so this is a material weakness in the city that we identified. So that's one of the reasons why we created that position. But through that, we're looking to keep this right now at sort of three people. I think ideally, because of the workload, we'd like to have 4. But considering some of the comments and about bringing on somebody that's sustainable over a long period of time, I'm hoping that workload will eventually be done once we do a lot of the maintenance work. So as part of that as well, we created an agreement with the school department to fund 80% of the deputy procurement position. So for example, like this summer, we have bus contracts, food service contracts, there's a lot of energy contracts with the schools. Certainly we don't want to open up schools in August and not have buses and food and so on. Those are things that would normally take up the purchasing agent's time. And those are also things that an assistant purchasing agent would have no skill sets in doing. So you've got one person who can do that. At the same time, we have a lot of construction projects, not just the grant projects, but also just the typical water, wastewater contracts. We have multi-year contracts that were expiring, energy contracts. Again, the only person in that office with a skill set was the purchasing agent. So it became a big bottleneck to only have one person be able to do all of these projects. So by bringing on a deputy, we're bringing on somebody who actually understands procurement. To understand the importance of selecting somebody in this position, all right, I'll use myself as an example. If I wanted to purchase I don't have a laptop, but if I had a laptop from the city and I wanted to purchase a laptop from the city, then I would designate the chief procurement officer to declare it surplus, and then they would declare it surplus, and I would bid on that laptop, and if I was the highest bidder, then I would purchase it. Right, you think, okay, that's fairly straightforward. The State Ethics Commission determines that to be an ethical violation, that I am her superior. So if I dictate her to declare something surplus that I then get, I still get the laptop, even though it's an ethical violation. She gets personally fined. She, like, not even the city, she gets personally fined. Those kind of rules, very few people really know and understand when it comes to this. So we interviewed many people over many rounds who just didn't understand it, and they would have put themselves and the city at significant risk. So we finally find somebody that we believe has the skill sets to be able to do this. And that's why we wanted two people, not just because of the workload, but because of the the high degree of skill sets that you need, but also somebody who's willing to take on that particular risk of having to deal with these kinds of decisions.
All right, and then, again, I see in the line item here, there's a procurement officer at $39,000 and change last year, or FY projected, and then $65,000 and change for this year. And I'm just curious on why there is such a gap or why there's such an increase.
The $39,000 was for a partial year. The
Okay.
$65,000 is the full salary. We brought on somebody that would typically be at the assistant purchasing agent level, but we brought on somebody who was a lawyer by training and a much higher level. It didn't make sense for us to have one person with skill sets in the office and to have two essentially clerical people, which is what we had before. We had one person who could actually research and do the work and sign off on the work, and then we had two sort of support staff that didn't break the bottleneck. We also think that this particular person is somebody that could potentially, down the road, become a deputy procurement and so on. So we're sort of created the pipeline in that office.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Di Natale.
The mayor's plan is to not fill a vacant position that was clerical, and instead hire a third purchasing agent full-time. Plan is to fund the position at 80% via school choice funds. This means the school expects that 80% of the new agent's time be dedicated strictly to school purchasing needs, per the finance superintendent of schools. After the first year, given the remaining backlog, the school likely will no longer need this position to help them, at which point they will not support the funding of the job anymore, and we will therefore have to pick it up 100%. The reasons from the mayor and the solicitor for additional personnel in purchasing are the following. Departments and management staff are submitting requisitions and spec forms that have errors causing undue burdens on purchasing to correct. Numerous deadlines for the sewer separation project and other projects put the city in jeopardy of losing grant money already awarded, potential grant money, and fines from the EPA for noncompliance of consent decree deadlines. A memo from the mayor to department heads on June 4th of 2013 states the following, quote, "I believe that many of these delays and issues related to purchasing are attributable to the fact that people refuse to follow correct procedure, resulting in further delays and wasting both purchasing and legal resources of the city. It is clear from this information that the mayor finds nothing wrong with how purchasing itself is being managed. Everyone else is to blame for the ongoing problems that have stemmed several years. By everyone else, I mean the department heads and management staff that report to the mayor and who the mayor is directly responsible for. So it is logical to surmise that their supposed failures are the mayor's failures in management. I have had individual conversations this week with 7 separate department heads, and it was as if they were reading from a script. They weren't coached. They all said the same thing, surprisingly to me. Their input and opinion for the reasons that problems are ongoing are the following. Communication is poor, and in some cases non-existent between the office and requisitioners. Once requests are submitted, there are frequent instances where staff are not alerted as to where there are mistakes, corrective action needed, or how far along the request is in the process. There are instances where there are no efforts being made to meet with department heads to rectify any errors made. Timeline to completion from point of request to contract award is usually 10 to 12 months. And the contracts reach vendors before department heads receive a copy. Again, this is all from these 7 that I talked to. A couple of months ago, some department heads petitioned the City Council to amend the existing city code to align with recent changes to the state procurement laws to increase the buying power limit to $10,000 from $5,000. However, the move being opposed by the city solicitor at the time in purchasing, but we approved it anyway. The department heads are telling me that it has been relayed to them that a change has not gone into effect after the passage by this council, and still hasn't. This change has to be initiated by the purchasing office to delegate the authority for the $10,000. That hasn't been done, and it's been months since we've approved the change. So the question is why? For whatever reasons, this hasn't been done. The mayor, from her own memo recited earlier, wrote that, quote, "The purchasing department and law department will post revised forms and updated policies on the public drive and conduct seminars to review current purchasing policies. I request all of you attend the same," end quote. However, no such seminars or training sessions have been held, according to these department heads, on almost a year since this memo was released. One department was prepared back in February of this year to conduct training on spec writing, and still hasn't heard back on when that's going to take place. So department heads and managers are being blamed for the purchasing delays, yet almost a year has passed, no training to get that going. I don't know why it takes a year to train. There are a multitude of communities faced with purchasing needs, in some cases more so than Fitchburg, that survives with one agent and one clerk, i.e., Leominster, and others. Fitchburg, if the mayor's plan is approved, will now have 3, with one dedicating most of his or her time to the schools, and I might add, with no clerical staff. What's the guarantee that one of these 3 agents isn't going to be doing paper pushing? So we're going to be paying someone a full-time salary for purchasing needs when they're going to be pushing paper. It is evident to me that 3 agents and no clerical staff will lead to undue burdens on paper pushing. They should entertain instead a temporary purchasing agent, one that is not full-time with benefits. That temporary agent could be paid for by other departments to work specifically with those departments like wastewater and water, and not work under purchasing. One other issue that is deeply concerning to me is the fact that the city, well before the mayor submitted this budget plan, put a rec out for this position. Cast aside the legislative affairs aspect of it being a law, because we have positions in our law that we don't fund, this went out to bid for a new job before this council appropriated the funds. So HR was notified to go out and get this hire, and they have made a hire, and the person starts in a few weeks, before we've secured the funding for this position. So is it the policy of the city to go and bid for new jobs without the funding securely in place? It's a rhetorical question. After gathering all of these pertinent facts, I am convinced hiring a 3rd agent will not correct the problems that are ongoing in this department. If operational inefficiencies are present and ongoing, adding more staff only compounds this problem. There needs to be substantive changes made other than hiring more people, and every department head I've talked to echoes the same sentiment. I am prepared for the administration to warn this council that by not approving this funding, we, this city council, will be responsible for any fines or loss of money that comes as a result. I outright reject this and will not be intimidated in approving this, knowing that manpower is not the problem. Since adequate and promised training has not occurred after almost a year since it was determined that that was what was needed, there is no surprise that mistakes may be made from time to time and continue to be made. There is no guarantee, for me anyway, that more people will alleviate this problem given all of these facts that I know. So therefore, I am recommending $70,000 be cut from the deputy procurement agent line. Thank you.
Councilor Bean.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to Mr. Wilson. I think it was 2 years ago I brought up the fact that a number of communities are using cooperative purchasing programs or state contracts to help reduce the burden on purchasing departments. do we take advantage of those programs, or have we looked at those? I know the state contract probably have, but on the
Do.
purchasing program, which ones do you take advantage of? How
There's
have
a
they been helpful?
variety of different contracts that we have access to, and we use them on a regular basis, but we're predominantly bogged down with construction now. There's no cooperative purchasing or no state contracts. There's no other resource available other than bids that we issue for our own projects. And we have multiple projects that are covered under an administrative consent order.
How many projects do we have under that?
I'm not sure the exact number. I think it might be, what, eight? Eight in combination, including CSS 4D.
That haven't been awarded yet?
I think
There's
there's 8
more?
pages just listing them. We actually have okay. We can certainly go over the operational issues. I'm going to be dedicating a lot more of my time to purchasing and overseeing this, because here's one of the issues, and it is a management issue. If 22 departments have 22 projects, but they all decide to drop it on in August, then that doesn't work as well as if they're spread out, so you have 2 a month. So department heads will work on a project when it's convenient or when it's needed for them, but then not necessarily let purchasing or myself know that that project's coming down the line. Now, that's my job to know that. So right now, all of the projects for the next year and a half are going to come through my office so that we can schedule them. And right now, the decisions of this project, we do not have the staff time to actually do. This project, we may have to put off, or this project, I'll need it 6 months earlier because that's the time slot that's available. So if you're going to get a,
Pause you there, I was just to,
Yeah,
on your
so-
comment. So you have department heads out there working on these projects, so do you have like department head meetings where they can tell you what's going on, or I'm just kind of surprised that they're doing stuff kind of without being involved, or is there any kind of communication, department head meetings, things like that?
we
can get control of it?
we do to a degree, but we'll get lists of projects, and then we'll get, whoops, I forgot about this one or this one. The other thing is that the projects are organized often in construction or services and so on. All of those go to one person right now. So if she is doing, if I know all the construction projects, they still get crowded out on the day-to-day basis by a service procurement project or a renewal project. So there's buckets of things that are not under one list, and if they're under one list, which we had, they're not scheduled. You know, a list of projects doesn't mean that they're scheduled properly. So if we have 8 wastewater projects, for example, going on, what's the period of time? Because is it 8 in 2 months? Is it 8 over the next 2 years? You know, what does it mean? Because there's also projects that we have a 5-year deadline through the consent decree, but it will take 5 years to do. So it's not quite an apples to apples or oranges to oranges. And there's also some service contracts where we have to make financial decisions to say, do we extend this 3-year contract another year at unfavorable terms because we don't have the time to do that, because the 20 grand more it's going to cost over here, we're going to focus on another project which saves 200,000. You know, we'll make those kinds of decisions. Or do we try to rebid because we think it's a good time for energy contracts and we can lock in at a lower rate and save? And even when you're doing that, you're also taking risks. We just signed the energy contract, so.
Let me just pause you for a second. You mentioned the wastewater projects. I know those are big. It's, you know, hundreds of million dollars. Since the wastewater, I believe, is a revolving enterprise fund, are they reimbursing the city for those costs, or can we contract that part of it out and then have the wastewater pay for it? Why are we, you know, I mean, I'm just thinking there's got to be other ways to look at this. I mean, if that's the big bog down, why can't, since the wastewater is an enterprise fund, they have the funds, we provided the bond issue, it's part of the operate and part of the cost, why couldn't that money be used to hire contract services to get that cut up to date? Because once that's cut up to date, it's gone. Hopefully we won't be doing these projects again for a while.
We are discussing that right now. Dick and I have been in discussions about whether it's a direct cost, so whether it's something like a less wastewater department here, whether it's, for example, someone that they hire that's embodied in their budget, or whether it is a change in the revenue page, which is reimbursement from department/water or wastewater. The scheduling piece is going to give us a good handle on how much time is specifically spent for each department when. So I think once we get that, it'll be a better, we'll have a better idea of what we can legally allocate towards those specific things. Because you also get in trouble, you can't spend enterprise funds on, you can't spend it on buying a fire truck for the fire
Right,
department.
no, that's what I'm saying. This is targeted to, and the vast amount of dollars that must be in purchasing for construction's got to be the water or wastewater, both those enterprise funds, which could cover the costs and maybe done out of their shops. I don't know. I'm just thinking outside the box, thinking some way to get this stuff done. I know there are other projects that are outside of water and wastewater that are waiting to be done. I know Councilor Caddy brought up in a project the other day that's a year old that we all have been waiting to hear from, and I know the people have. So all I'm saying is, are there ways to kind of help get this going quicker? We have the funds, just got to figure out who's going to pay, where what box is going to come in. And I'm not trying to second judge your administrator, I'm just saying, giving you some ideas, and we got to think outside the box sometimes.
Yeah, it's definitely a multidimensional question. We sought projects as well, so we are purposefully increasing the number of projects. So like some of the flooding projects, those have been, somebody said, my grandmother was dealing with this issue, but they all happen to be coming in at once. Same thing with the school departments. We frankly have been so busy on identifying the problems and then trying to go and get grants for them that we didn't really necessarily realize that we've got this big bottleneck that also happened to come in with the consent decree. The consent decree has been in negotiations for 14 years, so the time frame for that was only something that we recently understood and knew about and agreed to. So a lot of this is sort of happening at once. Can I tell you what the 5 or 10-year long-term plan is? I can't yet in this department. We're trying to do this at least 2 years or a year and a half at a time. But I can tell you that right now, with what we want to do, we are unduly burdened with all of these projects, and either some projects are going to have to give, or we're not going to be as proactive in soliciting more. Some of this
Let me just pause. Is there a list of all these projects? I mean, we hear about, we say projects, but
So,
is it, because maybe the council should know about the projects, because I know about some of them because we're here about the backlog of the signage and the Shade Street thing. Are there more projects that we think are happening that aren't happening? I guess if we have a copy of that list, it'd be helpful.
So I've had a number of these questions from counselors, and I've told them about the list. I've also said that we're in the process of scheduling them, and that might be more helpful. If you want the giant list of projects, I think that's well and good. But if you don't know, so each project now is broken down into the particular time frame. So if there's 6 things that a department has to do, and then there's a bunch of things that purchasing has to do, and then there's a bunch of things that other people have to do, it's not just a list of projects. A project is not equal to another project. It depends, are you soliciting engineering services first, and then develop the actual project later? Is this a service contract? Is this a construction contract? Is this like a food service? Is this a project? How many years is that? And then how long does it take to go through each of those steps? So there might be 10 projects, and they may take longer than 20 projects on another list, depending on what those are. So I think once we have those sort of scheduled and timeframes put in place, then we're going to be moving projects around. We're going to say we can't do every single project in August, for example. So I might say to the schools, your food service contract that you typically do in the summer, those might have to happen in February, before the construction period hits. So I think that will be helpful for everybody to see, but we're still massaging and negotiating, and we still have to have tough conversations with department heads. And then that schedule that you will see will be the product. And then that's the one that's going to be updated and modified. So now you have something that's a working document. You know where you are in the queue in terms of projects. And then you also know why if something gets kicked out. So if a $150,000 demolition project for a city hall garage, because there's a life safety issue, you will see the impact of it. You might see a domino effect of everything being pushed aside.
And I understand. One final question. I just looked on the website. We don't have a purchasing page most cities will have a purchasing department page and list the RFPs that are out there, listed who won the RFPs, and I just know this because I do that for a living. Is there any reason why we don't have a purchasing website that lists all that, or lists the requirements, or lists when things are due, or?
We don't issue bids electronically. We just don't have the capacity to do a lot with that website right now. We just don't. There's just too much work, too many
I
projects.
see this for a number of reasons. One is for
And-
public information. The public knows that, hey, look at that project is going out to bid, and the other is for local companies or other people to bid on it.
We post them,
Right. I'm just saying the website is,
advertise them,
more cities are doing through the website.
but we do need to do more on the website.
Yeah, there's not even a
We really
listing
do.
of it, so,
I agree.
Is that, Council?
I think so for now. Can I come back later?
We'll consider it.
Okay.
Councilor Kuchmarek.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Wilson, can you tell me, just walk me through a normal year that isn't a sewer separation year? On average, how many requests or proposals are we processing a year, or receiving a year?
It depends. I have to be reactive based on what departments need. So, and one of the problems is I'm not notified of what's in the pipeline. I don't know what to expect. So typically, I do get multiple requests for designer services for architects or engineers. That's predominant. But there could be RFPs for other things. This year, we have to do the food service contract for the school department. That's a 5-year contract. It's an RFP process. Thankfully, it only comes up every 5 years. But there could be RFPs for other things. It's
Aside, though,
dependent on the
aside from the
department's
big
needs.
projects and the once in a 5-year or once in a decade projects, can you give me a ballpark of how many we're receiving a year? How many projects that your office is actively involved in?
RFPs, bids, purchase orders,
Just say those are all part of one project. How many projects a year?
Are you including requisitions?
Sure.
I probably sign minimum of a half a dozen requisitions a day,
Okay.
sometimes dozens. And those are just the day-to-day stuff that they go through. And then project and service contracts, I would say maybe half a dozen to a dozen a week.
So in terms of requisitions, how many, is there an industry standard? Is there a typical standard for, successfully processed requisitions or purchase orders?
Not really, not in the municipal section. In private industry, you can do whatever you want, whatever your company allows.
Okay.
But we have bureaucracy to deal with, and there's multiple statutes. It's not just 30B, get price quotes for supplies. Construction projects are much more difficult to do. Construction reform added much more work to the whole process. It opened it up. It's not just a bid with a pricing component and a specification. There's other things. If something is grant-funded or if it's coming out of the SRF loan pool, there's another layer of bureaucracy and mandates we have to meet. So depending on the type of the project and the dollar value, they evolve. So you could have a construction bid and you could have 26 filed sub-bidders, sub-bid categories. So you would have, possibly, you would have bids in each category on top of the general bids. So 26, say 26 times 10 bids in each category, and general bids. You have hundreds of bids on one project. They all have to be evaluated. All their DCAM certifications have to be reviewed. So that one project, while it doesn't seem that complicated as you get into it and it evolves, you have to go through the different steps, and you have to vet the contractor, the sub-bidders. So something like that isn't a one-week award period. You could bid it, it would be out for 4 to 6 weeks once it's advertised, and then your award period could take 2 to 4 months at a minimum, and that's just one. So if you have multiple projects like this, it creates a backlog, and it pushes the smaller things back, because you have to start the bigger ones before the smaller ones, or fit the smaller ones in between. And there's no way of knowing what's going to come in the office.
You spoke a little bit about a backlog, and that there's projects, waiting to be processed, and RFPs waiting to be approved, et cetera. I mean, can you give us a sense of how big of a backlog we have, and how many at the end of the day we won't be able to meet the project timeline?
So that would be a question for me, because
Sure.
I'm handling that. And we don't know that yet until we schedule them. So having a list of projects doesn't tell me how quickly and when they can get done. And then cross-checking those with price considerations. If things move, then if moving one creates more of an increase than another, those are things we're going to have to consider. If there are fines associated with that, it's fairly complex right now. And we had no standard operating procedure before, so we're starting from scratch on this.
How many have we missed this year? Have we missed any this fiscal year? Any project timelines? Will we?
Probably.
Do we have a sense of how many and the
No,
total dollar fixed
because
value
many
associated
things are
with them?
beyond our control. They're problems created by the contractor, the bidders, and it's something we have literally no control over. We do have one project right now that was technically awarded in April.
Is it Shea Street speaking about?
No, it's an ACO project. It's the on-call sewer line project.
Okay.
And that project has not been officially awarded yet due to issues with the contractor that we're in the process of resolving. The law department's involved, and we're trying to seek resolution before we have to go to the second bidder. But it's things like that that affect the process, and it's nothing that any one of us can control, so we could have a guideline for dates, estimated dates of issue, bid dates, tentative award dates, and it falls apart because there's no way to control it. You can't force it into a time frame. They kind of, I don't want to say they take on a life of their own, but each project will have its own problems. Some are minor, some are bigger, and they have to be dealt with. And sometimes we have to involve the Attorney General's office, the IG's office, other agencies, to get input as to how to proceed, so we don't end up either in a bid protest or in court.
So, in terms of alleviating the backlog and utilizing existing resources, I know we have someone in queue, potentially, in a deputy. We spoke about training sessions to empower other department heads to be able to kind of control their own destiny, so to speak, a little bit more, and be able to, provide a head start. Where have we landed with that? Has that proved successful? Have we, how many other department heads are capable of assisting in the bidding, in procurement operations? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I guess that would go to me, because
Okay.
it's hard for her to be in control of other departments. She certainly does when a bid comes through and there's a particular issue with, let's say, that the specs don't have enough specificity to them. As essentially she becomes the project manager, has to envision the project and figure out what could go wrong from a bidding aspect.
I guess
So from the,
without interrupting, I guess to clarify then, I mean, how are we building relationships internally, department to department, to kind of, to assist with each other? I mean, communication is often the key, so how are we building those relationships with other department heads to expedite the process?
those who produce better biddable documents than others, we have sent into the other departments to try and assist. In many cases, they've helped to write their bids for them. but, different departments are very different, so that's not always an efficient way, and departments don't always have that kind of time because they're working on their own projects, but we've essentially relied on stronger staff to coach and mentor less strong staff. The $5,000 to $10,000 change and the seminars were dependent on the deputy procurement officer being on board last year. I am not going to take her time away to do seminars at this point in time until we have somebody like that on board. The $5,000 to $10,000, even something like that can create a lot of issues. And again, this is just part of the culture change, but if department heads, even if they do it inadvertently, try to break up projects to be smaller dollar items, go around the procurement piece, that generates huge amount of issues and a big liability for them and the city and the purchasing agent moving forward. And I'll say, I don't have 100% confidence that the department heads are at the point where that culture change has happened. When the deputy is on board, that's going to be one of their tasks, is to kind of police that particular practice that's occurring.
So we've talked a bit about outsourcing in other departments. Where do we see a role that, maybe contracted employees can assist us with a backlog instead of hiring full-time benefited people to help us? I mean, we have some short-term projects. It sounds like within the next 5 years, some of this backlog will be alleviated. We have several large state institutions that have procurement offices. I wonder if they don't have, either part-time or other people who might be willing to work for stipends or contracted, or recent retirees, both from our municipality or other municipalities that might be interested in working, for stipends or part-time. Have we explored that? Can that help us alleviate a temporary backlog to avoid adding another full-time position?
So we've been looking at that for several years before we arrived at the deputy procurement position. I've answered this individually to departments, but not as a whole. We have gone to all the state purchasing associations to see if there's anybody there. We have sought in the private sector. I have spent a lot of my own personal money taking people out to breakfast and to lunch to try and convince them to come contract for the city. I've contacted current and former mayors to get lists of their current and retired purchasing agents to see if I can get them to come on board. So I've done a lot. We've looked at this, and even actually advertising a full-time benefited position for somebody who is capable of doing this, we've had to go out, I think, 3 or 4 times just to find somebody with remotely the qualifications. So if you can't find somebody who's already doing the job, then hopefully you can find somebody who's already doing it who will also help us, which is what you're talking about. All I know is I'm exhausted doing the search, but I'm not sure if my search has been exhaustive. So I certainly look for, if you know of people out there that I haven't called up and harassed and tried to bring on board, please let me know.
Thank you. I'd encourage us as a city to, wherever possible, look to those other avenues. Can avoid adding other full-time staff, and certainly I do believe with other state agencies in our back door, we might, in our backyard, we might be able to maybe entice those organizations to see if they can help us out. Thank you.
Councilor Beazle.
I'm very happy to hear about the list you're putting together. I think this is one of the things, because I was actually going to ask at some point if we could have a list of the projects, the date they were received in the office, a priority, high, medium, or low, time frame needed. So in other words, what is the time frame needed before this project expires? The value of the contract, status of the contract, and the date completed. And this is valuable information because if at some point we can find somebody to contract, it's going to help us to alleviate a lot of this. So I'm glad that we're doing that. I think it's fantastic. My question is, so Nancy, what is the lowest, I don't want to say, what is the least amount of expertise, when you receive all this stuff in your office, and you're saying, this is a Nancy project, I need to take care of this, because this is what an expert. This here is something, I can do 3 dozen of these today because they're so easy to do. What is the least, when you're receiving paperwork, what does the workload look like what is the least amount? Is it requisitions? Is it, what is the,
Yeah, requisitions are generally assigned to purchase orders, and those move quickly.
okay. So when I was online, and I'm not an expert at 30B, I hope someday to be, but I just briefly looked at it and started looking at it. And I noticed there's courses that the state offers to actually do some of this. Would it make sense for us to send some of our dedicated associates down there to learn some of these simple functions, so that if all of a sudden you are inundated in your office, and through Lisa's list, Lisa could say, my God, she has got so much on her plate right now, I just want to pull a couple people in, take care of the easiest task. And Nancy, I see you have these lists here, and you're not going to get all these in done time because we need these done. So I'm going to call this agency. Does that help the workflow at all?
Yeah, I guess I can answer that. So we've looked at that, and there's one caveat. First of all, just simply going to those courses gives you a framework, but it's far different than in practice. So there is still a big skills gap there. Part of what will help us stay out of trouble is to create some mentorship and oversight. And I think having a deputy procurement will allow either Nancy or that person to provide further oversight. So we've had, I think, 3 people that I know of who have taken some courses. One, unfortunately, might be going on to another position. One person is potentially going to, well, one of those people was potentially going to retire. So these are sort of people that we've found who had the time, or maybe some of they're somewhere in the pipeline. They might be a department head, or they might be a clerk, but it doesn't quite match the skills that we need. The incremental help has essentially been for those individuals to maybe help somebody get their bid specs a little bit better, but it doesn't help on the back end where Nancy has to review everyone, per ordinance of having that one procurement officer actually go and review everything that happens. It just really meant that our specs are slightly more biddable when they get to us.
And I understand that, but I guess my fear is right now with the sewer separation project, that seems to be a huge thing. And so now everything's backing up because of that. So now we're going to hire another person. He comes in, and eventually the sewer separation project's going to be gone. So now the workload shrinks. But now we still have the person that we hired because of the amount of workload that was being, and this is when we're talking about contracting out. This is where contracting services is important, because you could call a contracted service, if you can find one, and say, I've got 6 months' worth of work, I need 6 people here tomorrow to get this. It clears the desk off, and now you're ready to move forward, whereas now, if you just have one person, and you're hiring one person, and you have 6 months' worth of work.
In theory, that works, maybe, because I think part of this budget discussion is to sort of justify my thinking in some of these numbers. Without sort of getting into very personnel issues, I was very clear, for example, in the police, that we know a number of police officers are going to retire because they're going to hit that age of 65. We will have retirements within that time frame. And by 2019, we're also going to have a big drop in our debt service, where we're going to have a number of projects on the timetable. The sewer separation is going to go on for quite a number of years. We've got Crocker School and some other school renovations are in the pipeline. I think once we get a handle on that two-year project timeline, then we're going to project it out. This is what the Capital Commission is working on, too. We're going to be projecting it out for 5 years, 10 years, and so on. But again, we start off from ground zero, and these are things where we can do back of the envelopes, but the back of the envelopes doesn't help you in the day-to-day implementation and efficiencies. The cost for us to not bring on services right now, and the potential fines or loss of grants or so on, is significantly larger than laying off somebody even in the next couple of years and paying 2 years of unemployment. So in looking forward, even though we would like to wave a magic wand and say, wouldn't it be nice if everything theoretically fit and we knew that we had the cheapest cost moving forward, I'm looking at sort of two proposals, which is trying to find those services that you're talking about and not being able to find them. Continuing, I've been looking for them for years. Potentially, they might drop in my lap in the next 2 weeks. You never know. But I'm taking a calculated risk, given that these deadlines are just stacking up and stacking up and stacking up. So even just the year we've waited, or the few years we've waited, or the next 2 weeks we've waited without having that staff on board, creates these liabilities that are much larger than whatever theoretical savings we could find. Could we find a contractor? Or, if we would have to lay somebody off in the future.
So, I mean, when I'm looking at this, so what you're saying is, you basically painted us in a corner, because if the council cuts this position, then it's going to come back that the council...
I'm not looking to paint you in the corner.
Right.
I'm giving you my thought process between what I consider to be two options ahead of us. You can certainly criticize my actions going 6 years back. I welcome you to do that. But if they are what they are, and there's two options moving forward, and the third option that you want means going back in time, and I can't do that, then I'm just going to be as honest as I can and say that these are the two options moving forward. This is my thinking. If you disagree what I did last year, I don't know if that's necessarily a solution moving forward. If it's up to the council, if you cut these positions, I will make do. And I will suffer the consequences politically of not having to do these things. I will try everything that I can. I will maybe drop other things. I don't know what I'll do, but I'll certainly have to spend a lot more time and resources. But unfortunately, there are consequences here. I would love to come before you and have two win-win situations. But part of the win-win situation is I could have also ignored Shea Street and Columbia Street flooding issues. I could have ignored the dams. Many of the things that we're doing right now, we knew about decades before. Maybe part of my issue is that I opened the can of worms and looked at the capital stuff, and we have all of these projects. So I'm just going to say that these are my recommendations, these are my thinking. I still think that this is the most cost-effective and politically effective, and will get us hopefully closer to getting a lot of these projects done.
Thank you.
Councilor Green.
With the understanding now of how complicated the purchasing department is, my only question is, why do we have all of our eggs in one basket? If Nancy was to get sick or not be able to do her job, who would do it? Who would do it? So why is it taking this long? And again, here we are being reactive versus proactive, because I can't believe that now all of a sudden in fiscal year 14, moving forward to 15, that now purchasing is facing this crisis. I mean, it looks like there's been lots of projects before, and, again, just trying to move forward so that we can serve the residents of Fitchburg in the best capacity. How are we doing that? I mean, is it a short-time contracting for the needs right now, 6 months out? I'm not sure if by hiring this one other person, then that's going to alleviate the long-term effects that this department has. I mean, we've got millions of dollars sitting on the desk waiting, and at some point, don't we lose that?
The new hire and the person sitting next to me have made that particular case to me over and over and over again, and have continually requested the clerk. And I've said no, that I don't think that it's politically and financially feasible at this point in time. And I do agree with her assessment that it would help alleviate things. Now, is that hiring of a fourth person necessarily a good long-term decision? Would I have to lay them off in a few years once we get over this hump? Potentially. I haven't done the analysis to the point where I can answer that question, because we are such in that catch-up mode, and I talked about, and we're kind of now in that stabilization mode where we're developing standard operating procedures and we're trying to figure all these things out. We didn't have the space to talk about a lot of these things a year ago, but I also, in this respect, wanted to create this position by ordinance first. So the position didn't exist until last year, and then once it was created, to wait until there was funding with somebody retiring and using excess funds within the department, and then, of course, bringing this forward to you here. So it's one of those things where I'm hearing, why didn't this happen before? Could this happen later? I think it's always it's happening right now. This is sort of the trajectory that we move forward. I would have loved to hire this person last year so that we could be sitting here in a much more stable position. Because I think the issue before us is not just the 70,000 with the 56 credit, it's all of the projects. I think the urgency that you have is because we just have so many projects that we want to get done, and I think we all feel the consequences of not getting them done.
My last point would be then, would you ever entertain the idea of hiring any of these positions on a consultant or on a contractual basis?
Well, we have 2 of the 3 staff on board. Would the new hire come on board on a contractual basis? Not for the pay that they're getting. We would have to pay significantly more.
Thank you.
Before I go to the next council, could I just ask as a follow-up on that, Mayor, when you say significantly more, would 25% more, which is what the benefit packages is, do it?
You're asking me to predict the outcomes of the negotiations?
Well, I'm just asking if for a ballpark guess. When you said significantly more, I'm trying to figure out what significance is.
Well, my hypothesis is based on the fact that we're not paying this person significantly more than they were paying before, so they're getting a comparable salary with benefits, and they're also traveling a longer distance. Would 25% cut it? I don't know.
Okay.
Because if they're looking for benefits and they have to privately go out for benefits, and ours is cheaper because we have group insurance, then maybe not. I mean, this hasn't been brokered. I also, again, feel like this is potentially a person who, again, if somebody retires or there's a pipeline, just like the auditor and deputy auditor, this is a good move for us to make, to have somebody who's dedicated to the city, just also knowing how hard it is to find somebody on a permanent basis by the multiple advertising and even on a temporary basis.
Thank you. Councilor Caddy.
I'm not feeling real good about this conversation at all. We don't know how far behind we are. We don't have a plan. I do want to make a comment. I was venting about the Shea Street project to Jay Bry at the college, and he told me if the city needs help, the college would help us with procurement. I told Attorney Barrett that 2 weeks ago. I don't know if he's told you, but we're in such a deep hole with this. I want to give you an example. Bids come out, a bid goes in at April 1st. The contractor's gearing up for the summer. If that bid doesn't go out April 1st, that contractor has bid somewhere else. If the bid finally gets to him on June 1st or July 1st, he's got his workload already, but he'll do the job for you. You can add $100,000 to it. If you don't know, a few weeks ago, we got another grant for Main Street. It was nobody's fault, but the bids went out late. The original bid was, I forget what the figure, but the bid came in a couple $100,000 over. Why? Because the bid got out late. We're lucky that the state understood that and they gave us the additional funds. You're shaking your head, but I heard that from a pretty good source. Whether I got my figures right or wrong, what I can tell you is being a contractor for 25 years, like I said, when you got more work than you can handle and someone comes you for a job, I can do your job. And you just, because you don't want it, you just add to it, add to it. I think that's what's going to happen with the Shea Street project. I think we're not going to have the funds to do it. I think we have an extremely serious problem. I don't like this conversation tonight whatsoever. I haven't heard how we're going to get ourselves out of the hole. This is something we have to contract out. This has to be done now. We're going to end up with fines with the sewer separation project because we're so far behind. This is going to cost the city some serious money. I'd say push the red button right now. This is very, very serious.
Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad we have exhausted so much time and resources to find a deputy procurement officer, unlike the economic development director, which took 3 weeks. You know, every department head I've talked to, very highly respected individuals, all say the same thing. Have you talked to all of them? Because they don't buy what is coming out of these memos. So who's mistaken here? I'm curious. And there are questions being asked about full-time versus part-time. Ladies and gentlemen, they've already hired the person before we approve the funding. Wonderful. There's a good precedent setter. We're hiring people before the funding's in place. And I guarantee we're going to get blamed for this if we don't do it, and we get that first fine from the EPA. You can see it coming right now. All the department heads I talk to tell me emphatically, adding one more person isn't going to solve the problem. It isn't, and I agree with that. It's not going to solve this problem. Okay? Next thing I'd like to say is, there are individuals I spoke to, okay, who tell me that, and I've asked these communities, they get everything done with one agent. One agent. We need 3. What are these cities and towns doing that we're not doing? Like the IT department. Everyone's got excuses why we can't do something with one agent. Why are these other cities doing it? I heard one of the explanations is, well, they're not following the law. They're just doing whatever they want. And apparently they're getting away with it. We all must be missing something here, why these other communities that have consent decrees have one agent. And we need 3. It won't solve the problem. This problem's been going on for years. And if you don't want to listen to me, call every single department head who the mayor implicated in the memo saying it's their fault that this isn't getting done on time. And ask them if they share that opinion. They admit they make mistakes. There's a lot more to it than that. And I would like to know why the $10,000 hasn't been approved yet. We passed that over 2 months ago. Why hasn't the authority been given for the $10,000? Why are other cities and towns already granted that authority? I'm skeptical of that because the city solicitor, they're all against it because that cedes more authority to the department heads. I want to know why that hasn't been signed yet. Why are they still waiting? Why are other cities already doing it? What is the holdup here? I agree with Councilor Caddy. This is not going to get any better. Not going to. Adding one person isn't going to solve this problem at all. And I try to say these things in a calm fashion, but I lose my cool quickly because I wish people would listen here. We've already hired the person. So there's no more talk about it being a part-time job. We already hired the person without the funding. Does everybody like that practice? If where you work, HR, go hire somebody. Oh, do we have the funding? Oh, we'll worry about that later. I mean, come on. So I lose my cool because I do my homework, I do my research, I call everybody involved in this, and I read these memos, okay? I read these memos, and I talk to other people, and every single one of them says the same thing, okay? And when the school department gets what they need done, they're not going to pay us for that person anymore. And the questions as to the backlog getting taken care of, the school department is telling me, and the wastewater department, they would prefer to have temporary purchasing staff under their purview, who are knowledgeable in purchasing. There's another option. The mayor mentioned 2 options. I've got 4. That's one of the 4. And I'm telling you right now, I am upset because this has been ongoing for years. This is not the solution. And all department heads, or all of them that I've talked to, feel the exact same way. And give them a call. They'll give you an earful if you want the real story. Thank you.
Councilor Tran.
Mr. President, it's been really uncomfortable sitting here in the last 30, 35 minutes, and that discomfort comes from the mayor answering most of the questions posed by the city councilors for a position that costs over $84,000 a year. I can guarantee you that either tonight or tomorrow or during this week, I will either receive an email or a phone call or somebody on the street telling me that we're paying for a position that costs over $84,000 a year, and the mayor is answering all the questions for that position. This is a problem. It's a big problem. It's a black eye for the city. We're not getting any projects done, large and small. I wish that the city council was informed of the position before it was hired. One of the things that I would have advised the council and the mayor to do would be to do an audit of the department and see where the problem really lies and whether we do need additional personnel. But that's not the case anymore. Likewise, with Councilor Di Natale, I've talked to other communities, and they've all told me the same thing. They have one procurement officer, and either with a full-time or half-time clerk. And they all can do whatever all the things, all the projects they have on the table. Leominster, I'm sure they have plenty of projects going on, but they don't have the problem that we do. On top of all the other problems we have, this makes it worse. We need to solve it. I don't know where to start now because we've hired a second procurement officer, and I don't know if we should take that next step and do an audit of the department and see where the problem lies. And I think we should do that. I seriously think that should be the next step. Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilor Bean.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know we compare with Leominster a lot, but I just went online and just went to the city of Worcester, which is and Leominster is a very robust website where you can get information right at the top. The city of Worcester, in their budget, they list two positions in purchase department, the purchasing agent or director and assistant and a clerk. So the city of Worcester, which is the second largest city in the state, has 3 people. So it is kind of, when you think about it, and has Fitchburg with 3 people, you wonder what, how do you compare? I guess, are we comparing apples with apples or apples with oranges? But I was just surprised to see that.
I'd like to address that question because
sure.
I think there's a misconception here amongst everyone. From city to city, people do different job duties. If Leominster has one person and a clerk, they're doing 30B, and maybe small construction projects, in-house projects that are designed at a lower dollar level. The higher dollar level projects are done by engineers, as we do. However, we issue the projects. We're not a wealthy community, so as a cost savings measure, we issue them in conjunction with the engineers when they're ready. It's extremely expensive to bid everything through an engineering firm. It could cost you between $50,000 and, say, $150,000 to do that, depending on the size of the contract. And I'd say the CSS 4D would fall in that compartment. So if you have PAs that are doing strictly 30B, they're buying materials and equipment, they're not buying anything else. The communities are paying the extra money, whether it's through rate hikes to taxpayers or loan orders or something. They're getting the extra money to fund bid services, and they're having it done by an engineering firm that bills out a loaded rate of probably at least $100 an hour for a clerical person to hand out plans, or maybe $150 an hour for someone to send out bids. It's expensive to do that type of divide. I think Worcester may have a similar arrangement. I think Leominster may. Know a lot of people that applied for the job here came in and they had 30B experience and only 30B experience. They had no other qualifications. And this job encompasses everything. It's building, it's Public Works, it's designer selection, it's 30B, it's larger services, it's not just buying copy paper for the schools or,
Right,
you
and
know,
those are the easy
smaller
ones, yeah.
things like that.
We said those were the 13
Yeah.
ones, but.
So, well,
But, I mean, I'm just looking at
someone-
the city of Worcester, I'm just looking at their budget for
Yeah.
purchasing. I'm just saying, we're comparing. And the other thing, again, go back to I have to go back to the website, is that for other cities, there's so much information that you can get. I mean, I can get the city budget from Leominster, Worcester. You know, our website, again, and it's not just for us here, but it's for the public itself, to understand what we do, what we say. I mean, in Leominster, or in Worcester both, you can see what bids are out there, what bids have been awarded, who's been awarded to them. I mean, all the information is right on the website. And again, it may not lower the cost, but at least it gives the public information of what's happening and where things are going. I mean, that list should be on the website. I mean, that would reduce some of the calls we're getting. At least people know where it is and where it's at, just like that street paving list. You know, everybody wants to know where they are on the list. Put the list out there, and that way it's all transparent. We don't have to hide anything. No secret, not saying we're secrets, but the more transparent we are, the more informed our constituents are, they understand what's going on. But if they can't find the information, it's very difficult, and then they get suspicious.
Councilor Beazall.
So when we passed the ordinance for the $10,000, okay, I was all over that. And the reason why I wanted that was to make your job easier. So what is the time frame? What are we talking about? When is that actually going to start to happen? And really, what is the holdup on that?
I answered this question earlier. That position for deputy, I was waiting until we brought somebody on board. We first advertised this position after the council passed the creation of the position. I don't even know how many months ago. It was sometime last year. So it's been going on for some time. There was certainly no intention to not be transparent because we went through this public process to create the position, advertise it. I think because it's been so long since the initial hiring, maybe it's without our memories. I let her know that I thought it was a good idea to wait till that person came on board in order to allow that. Because at the end of the day, even though that allows them to go out, it still falls back on the city and on her to review. And I actually felt that even though it seemed like it would alleviate work in the long run, it actually might create more work in the short run. I thought we were going to get that person on board much quicker.
So what I'm asking though is, what is the time frame? I understand all that. So when you're sitting here now, can you say to me, Angelo, by the end of July, all the department heads will be able to use that up to $10,000? What is the time frame?
When the deputy procurement person comes on board, I will have a better understanding once we assess his exact level of skill sets when it comes to the nuances of the project moving forward. And if there is an ability at that point in time for us to have one or both of them oversee the transition to that, including sitting down with each department head and reviewing that. So I would say, I could tell you, okay, this person's coming on board in June. And then in 3 months, I think this person can then sit down with department heads and we can transfer that over. But I will also tell you that in June, July, and August, my priority is Shea Street and sewer separation, all these other things. So I haven't made that decision yet because I don't want to put something like that in stone when it may actually cause more issues in the beginning. Then this person's going to come on board. We're going to get this person started in a lot of these school contracts so that they're off Nancy's plate. And maybe at the same time, we're going to let this be one of the major duties. The implementation of that, like I said, I would rather get this person on board, assess what that transition is going to be with the duties, and then give you a better idea of what that's going to be. So how about I give you a better idea of what that is maybe 3 weeks after this person is hired.
But in the same token, too, is it possible to reach out to somebody else and say, look, we need the resources of having somebody else come in here and teach these people what they need to learn so that we can move forward? What it seems like is we're so far behind, and I agree with Council, this is, right now, I'm pushing the panic button and saying, from what I'm hearing from everybody, we need to push the panic button. This is something that is a serious thing that we need to get done. And so, for me, it's frustrating, or I'd be frustrated as a department head to say, the city council's giving you all this power, now all you have to do is sit back and wait till we get our act together to do this. Can we look at hiring outside help to come in, do a seminar, bring everybody in a room together, teach them all at once what they need to learn? Because honestly, unless we do that, unless you start empowering these people to do that, we're going to keep spinning our wheels on this. The other piece of this, too, is, now with 30B, that's 10,000 to 25,000, right? When we're talking about the different levels of funding and the expertise that's needed. I know it goes 0 to 10,000, and then 10,000 to 25,000, and then
And
anything,
over.
right. So you're the expert, you're the one that, when you're handling those huge things, there has to be at some point, when you're talking about these different levels, we've got to start empowering people to do their jobs and to take this on. And if it means that you need to come back to the city council and say, Angela, we're having a training seminar next week, everybody will be trained in 2 weeks, and it's going to cost us $5,000, we're going to need money, go ahead and do it. The sooner we can get these things done, the easier it's going to be for everybody. But we have to do it.
So, in theory, all that works, and I would love to just say that's what's going to happen and it's going to happen. But the outside people that you're saying, let's bring in and let's let them do this procurement stuff. We've had in-house procurement sessions that Nancy has done. And I would say that no one can do it better than her because she knows what she needs and she also knows how to do it in-house. So things like that have happened before. It's specifically what is the training that is needed and then what is the specific oversight that is needed. I mean, we're getting into total micromanagement and I just want to make sure I don't, necessarily pinpoint specific department heads and so on. But if the issues are a department head does not have a good handle on all their projects, that's not a training seminar. That is a lot of work working with that department head. And memos or things in the file, or even hiring and firing, or giving them professional development, that stuff is very time-consuming if that's the issue. Or somebody is out, maybe they're sick. Those are not training things, those are the things that take a really long time. Those are more time busters than the training piece. If someone knows that there are memos out there and that there are laws about $5,000 or $10,000, but they repeatedly break them or try to hide them, that is not a training issue. That is all those previous things I said before, which is me going in and managing, working with a department head and so on. If someone continues to produce specs on a one-time project and does not produce the detail of specs that are biddable, they want to do a paint project, but they don't specify the square footage of the paint project, and they don't specify whether the paint has lead in it. And then it gets to her desk. She's finding out about it, I'm finding about it because we're spending time reviewing that. That's not training, especially if that's been a problem that's been over and over again with specific departments to say, you need to have square footage, you need to have this. If the issue is that somebody's using a contractor who is developing the specifications and then bids on it, that's not a training issue. We've said those things in memos, we've said those things in seminars, but it doesn't mean that just because somebody's been through training, that they're going to automatically do all these things. It needs review. So I'll pick on Lenny, but Lenny recently instituted a new policy as DPW director that he is going to review everything that comes out of his department before it hits Nancy. That will hopefully save a lot of time, but I don't know if you know how busy Lenny is. So that he wasn't before. He wasn't because there were so many contracts coming out of his department. But now he's going to because he realizes that if he doesn't spend that time himself, which creates a bottleneck with him, that it creates protracted issues for even just one project, and it comes back and bites him. So that's not necessarily training. That's standard operating procedures, that's operational, that's management oversight, and so on. And I will tell you that it is a bit of a challenge when the management oversight is mayor over departments, departments over managers, and that's essentially it. Because a larger structure, you essentially might have a chief operating officer, or you might have a deputy or somebody like that. So a lot of it does involve this specific kind of micromanaging, and then even finding out about what that specific thing is, and then chasing people down. So we've got a compilation of those things. And again, this is not throwing department heads under the bus, but this is getting to that specificity level where if we went forward with that paint contract and there wasn't a square footage, that might have created some problems. If we went forward with a paint contract and there was lead and it wasn't specified, we could have gotten to an insurance issue that could have halted the project, we could have been financially liable, we could have been legally liable, and that's just a small paint project. Imagine the more complex projects. And we could have a whole night where we can sit here and sort of go over those kinds of specificities of the issues that we keep coming across in documents being unbiddable for a multitude of reasons. If a document is unbiddable, that is the fault of the department which is producing the bid, or the hired engineer or architect or project manager who is producing that bid. Nancy has to review those things. If they come in perfectly, it's going to sail through. The schedule that we're putting together is reliant on these things happening perfectly. So if something is a 6-week project, if we get something and it's unbiddable because there's a conflict of interest or the specifications are wrong, and we send that back to the departments, then we're chasing them down. Sometimes we're chasing them down for months to give us the rebid specifications. And again, we could go over those kinds of things as well, but if we think something is unbiddable and we send it back to a department head and we don't get biddable specs back, where's the issue there?
And I fully understand what you're saying, and it's your job to hold people accountable, but really the key here is we need to take the workload off. We need to get trained. And it sounds to me we're spinning our wheels, okay? As far as all those other things go that you're talking about, it's absolutely your job to take care of that and to hold every department manager accountable. And I'm saying every department manager. So that's your job, and I appreciate that. But in the meantime, I think if there are department heads out there that you feel can do this right away, then it needs to be done right away. Thank you.
Councilor Tran.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we're beating a dead horse here. We have 7 more departments to beat up. I think the mayor has heard our feelings loud and clear. Mayor, would it be too much to ask you to present to the council a plan in the next month or so and how to proceed with this department and getting the projects lined up, prioritized by time sensitivity and grant-wise? We want to make sure that all the projects are moving smoothly and moving forward, because if they're not moving forward, the city's not moving forward. I like to use an analogy. If you own a company and you're placing things out for order and people placing all these orders and the orders coming in and get stuck in the processing department, what happened to your company? It goes downhill. And that's what's happening with the city right now in terms of this department. Thank you.
Councilor Di Natale.
There was a commitment made to the department level staff that there would be training to rectify the problem, which was identified in the correspondence as, you are not doing what you are supposed to be doing. So there was a pledge made to these individuals that we, as your employer, will provide the necessary training to ensure it doesn't happen again. Granted, this is after years of this going on. Those department heads have told me emphatically there has been no training, and they don't know when there will be no training. We hear tonight that, training will come. I'm skeptical because it's taken a year so far. It's taken many years for these guys to get trained, and women. So where I take personal issue with this, and we can play semantics all we want, is there are communications being sent to people in charge saying, it's your fault this stuff is going on, but we're not going to train you yet. And that's the feeling of these people I spoke to. Like I said, there is someone ready to do spec training now. They were ready in January. It is now almost June. How much longer do they have to wait? I'm infuriated with this because it's as if my own boss at my company says, you're making too many mistakes in your job that is impacting how we operate. I don't know, though, when I'm going to train you to do it the right way. So keep making the mistakes. And this excuse I hear about the $10,000 limit, that is entirely because they don't want to cede control to $10,000. That's what this is about. Because we are the authority. We changed the law to $10,000. And it still hasn't been implemented, because there is a position in this city, in this department, and in this legal department that we don't want to cede that authority, because they fought us tooth and nail over it, and we discussed it many months ago. So we can get all the plans we want. This is not going to solve the problem, and the training has to be conducted now, and that's what we should demand we get for a date, so we can do a good service to the people that work for the taxpayers of the city and not have them continuously be blamed for the problems in this office without the requisite training. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments regarding purchasing? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilors, we're fast approaching the 9 o'clock time. I think it's beyond us to get any of the other departments in tonight. I would like to apologize to those who came and won't be heard this evening. We went long on a few things. I thought the end of the agenda with the city clerk, council, license commission, and elections might be left, but we have more than that. I would like to say that what I am going to do is, instead of putting them on the next calendar and pushing everything else back, I am going to make Thursday, June 5th, a hearing date, and we will put the ones that are left from tonight and anything that is left from the other 3 sessions that we have on that calendar, and they'll be done on Thursday, June 5th. Yep.
I will be out of the country
I
that
w-
day. I'm going to have somebody else represent.
One second. Mr. Lansani, I was going to contact the individual departments. If they have a problem, you can either have somebody represent you, or I can juggle somebody else and move you to a different date and move somebody else to the 5th to accommodate that. Madam Mayor.
I won't be able to attend that night. We have high school graduation.
Okay. I will do my best to accommodate everybody and make this work.
Mr. President, again, maybe I'm new, but is there a 9 o'clock deadline, or we just...
9 o'clock is our time.
Oh, okay, we can't go beyond that?
If we're in the middle of a department and we're going to go to 5 or 10 past 9, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I'm not going to start departments that have the possibility of being extended like this one was, to go longer.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion second to adjourn. All those in favor?